Out of time. We will win. That's it. Happy ending.
NBC News Radio, I'm Brad Siegel. President Biden admits he's feeling a bit frustrated over the delay in a vote on his infrastructure bill. Biden made the comment to reporters outside the White House this morning as he was leaving for Delaware. He also chided reporters outside the White House for their coverage of his legislative agenda.
Hey, look, one of the things I love about you guys, I watched today, Biden vowed he's going to do this. Biden's committed. Biden's going to work like hell to make sure we get both these passed. I think we will get them passed.
He plans to work with lawmakers through the weekend on both the infrastructure and spending bills. The Supreme Court is denying a request to block New York City's vaccine mandate for public school teachers. The deadline was 5 p.m. Friday for city school employees to get their first dose or face suspension or even possible termination. Justice Sonia Sotomayor denied the request by a group of teachers for an emergency injunction. The Texas man who runs the website InfoWars will have to pay up for claiming the 2012 Sandy Hook school shooting in Connecticut was a hoax. Alex Jones was found legally responsible in 2 lawsuits. The lawyer for the victim says his clients are thrilled.
Finally, there's some accountability standard that he's now going to have to answer to.
That's attorney Bill Ogden, who says he's never seen a case play out like this. Jones, who lives in Austin, did not comply with court orders to provide information for the suits. That means he lost the cases by default. A jury will determine how much he will owe the plaintiffs. Tens of thousands of people are taking to the streets across the nation today for the Women's March. Organizers say this year's rally will be a protest of Texas's new restrictive abortion law. The Supreme Court is scheduled to take up a similar law in Mississippi on Monday. It's the first Women's March to happen since former President Trump left office. And federal officials expect full containment of Northern California's massive Dixie Fire by the end of October. Brad Siegel, NBC News Radio.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT Willow Springs is powered by ComEd. Lower your energy bills and reduce your carbon footprint with the ComEd Energy Efficiency Program.
I'm David Hochberg. It's Saturday. You either recently filed for or are getting ready to file for a divorce. You have questions about your home or purchasing a new home, which is why you should call Team Hochberg, your trusted local lender. I've been divorced and know how overwhelming divorce can be, but it doesn't have to be that way. Team Hochberg has helped thousands of listeners, but we can't help if you don't call 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. Homeside Financial Legal Housing Lender, unless 112-4061.
This is Joan Esposito, and here at WCPT, we love pets. So much that we're spotlighting an adoptable, adorable dog or cat every month. So many deserving pets are waiting for their forever home. We've partnered with community shelters and our sponsors, Love for Dogs Pet Grooming and Mark Drugs, to talk about why rescue is best. It's all on Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive. See our current adoptable at WCPT820.com.
We've all been spending more time indoors than usual, but FinishingChicago.com has an offer to update your interior. Whether your space is residential or commercial, for a limited time you can save up to 25% on painting and decorating. FinishingChicago.com has the most dynamic interior spaces available from industry-leading union craftspeople. That's union quality, efficiency, and industry-leading expertise in your home or commercial space. Visit FinishingChicago.com to find a contractor in your area. This unprecedented access to union quality labor at a reduced rate is only available for a limited time. Revitalize your spaces with fine decorative upgrades applied by the most knowledgeable craftspeople in the industry. Whether it's a new color or transforming your walls into something truly special, our contractors have all the options. Take advantage of FinishingChicago.com's Update Your Interior savings before they're gone. For up to 25% off your new finish, start with FinishingChicago.com.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hi there, and welcome back. I'm here in the studio at WCPT with Paul at 773-763-9278. Look, as those of you who regularly tune into the show know, I want to talk and use our time to talk about and explore politics and policy, the ways Democrats are organizing, but also the society that we're working so hard to create. And last week, you were very patient as we went deep into the weeds on Mayor Lightfoot's proposed budget for the city of Chicago. I just think it's important for everyone to understand that governing is really hard work, and there are very thoughtful people who are both for aspects of it and against it, but are working hard on these issues. And that's true at the local level, it's true at the federal level. But of course, we didn't spend much time on the most important issue last week. And that's what I'm going to spend almost all our time today on, and that is the very real threat to our democracy. It was a long time in getting to where we are, but we have a terrific group today that's going to help us understand how we came here, what the threat is, and believe me, it's real, it's well organized, it's highly funded, and it's homegrown. It's animated by ethnic and racial anxieties. It takes advantage of structural weaknesses in our election laws. It sustains itself with unprecedented campaign of propaganda and lies. And I have 4 terrific guests today to help us get to the bottom of it. Of course, I want to hear from you. But let's get started right away with Tiffany Muller. Tiffany is the executive director of End Citizens United. And like me, she served on a local city council. When she won her seat in the Topeka, Kansas council, she became the first openly gay elected official in all of the state. Under her leadership, End Citizens United has grown from a startup into a nationwide organization. It's got more than 4 million members, 800,000 grassroots donors. That's pretty terrific. And just in the 7 years since founding, they've raised over $130 million for this effort with an average contribution of just $14. Hi, Tiffany. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Edwin. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, I'm thrilled. And, you know, I want to talk about money in politics, about Citizens United, about what we need to do to make sure our politics isn't always for sale. But first, I just love talking to people who have served at the closest local elected level. And I always ask, and I hope you'll indulge me for a minute, tell us about the area you represented. What was it like, and what did you love about being close to voters?
Being on the Topeka City Council was and is still one of the greatest honors that I've had in my life. And my district was near the city park and one of our largest parks in the area. And it also covered the governor's mansion and some of our new building areas. And Topeka, for those who don't know, Topeka, Kansas is a city of about 100,000 people. And what I loved the most about being closest to the voters is that it felt like you could really make a difference, right? And that the decisions that we were making about everything from infrastructure, since that's a big topic of conversation right now, and the ways of roads and sidewalks and repairs and, you know, even things like the sewage drainage system in the city, that wasn't just about fixing those roads or the sewer. That was about investing in our community and building a foundation that the community could really grow on. I was talking to someone else about this the other day, and I said one of the things that you really understand as a city council member are that people will pick up the phone at 6 a.m. They'll call you. They'll ask you to fill that pothole. They'll ask you to get the trash cleaned up outside their house. They'll ask you about getting a dog park, right? And that was fantastic. I felt very in touch with what the community needed and wanted, and I'm really proud of the service. And still, like I said, one of the greatest honors of my life was to be able to serve on the city council.
I'm so glad that you talked about that, because as we get into the sort of horrors of our democracy in the national level, I have such confidence that Americans, in large part because of the relationships they have with local elected officials, are never going to overthrow our democracy, notwithstanding the strong efforts that are underway in our country right now. So that just the work that you've done is, maybe not just the greatest honor in your life, but a great way to honor our country. And I'm grateful to everyone who does it.
Well, and for everyone who's listening right now, we need folks like you who are ready to step up and run for local office as well. We need good, thoughtful public servants who are willing to, frankly, take a sacrifice, make that time and commitment to serve our communities and to help shape the vision of how our government and how our society is going to look. Because if we truly want a government that represents the people, we have to elect people who are going to fight for that.
Yep, at every level. All right, well, now let's turn to Citizens United, because in some cases, the people we want to elect are up against a whole lot of dark money. Could you remind everyone what that case was about?
So the Citizens United decision was handed down in January 2010 by the Supreme Court. And it basically it took two really terrible ideas and it merged them together. And it said money equals speech and corporations are people. And it merged those two things together. And it allowed for an unlimited and undisclosed amount of money to flood into our elections. And frankly, what it did is it allowed that money to drown out the voices of the people who are supposed to be represented by the government, and then instead created a system that's now captured by the money in our politics and keeps us from making progress on all of our top priorities, from climate change to gun violence to lowering prescription drug costs to creating an economy that's more fair and more just. You can trace back the dysfunction on all of those issues to the money the money in politics, the special interests that are funding it, and that Citizens United decision. And I'll just give you a quick fact. Prior to Citizens United, in the 20 years prior to Citizens United, there was $750 million in outside spending in our elections. No doubt that's a lot of money, $750 million. But in the 10 years since that decision, it's risen to $7.4 billion. $7.4 billion, right? So we've seen this exponential growth of money, and it's just drowning out the voices of the people, and they feel more and more like their government's not working for them.
And helpless to do anything about it. I mean, my own brother says, look, I'm not donating to candidates anymore. There's too much money. It doesn't matter what one person gives. It's all drowned out. And in his view, and I think he's wrong, is everybody says they're against money in politics, but when they get elected, they don't change it. But that's not really right? Let's talk about how you rank and rate members of Congress, because this is important, and I think it's the way we're going to get this change, right? You look at some pretty specific things. We do. Right? Like they reject corporate PAC money. And that's about 60 members right there.
That's right. That's right. I mean, our job is to actually elect champions who are going to go to Congress and who are going to fight for these things. Not just say that they're for them, but actually do the work to make it public policy. And that is the moment that we are in. That is what we're seeing. In 2018, we started working with candidates all across the country to encourage them to center these issues in their campaigns, to run on them, and to do things that were really tangible for voters to understand. And one of those was to reject corporate PAC money. Mm-hmm. And that's because, look, we know that corporations right now have outsized influence on our policy making. As a matter of fact, they give almost half of all PAC money given to candidates comes from corporations. And they're not giving out of the goodness of their heart. They are giving because it's going to help their bottom line. So they almost always are giving for, tax cuts or less regulation, things like that. It's all about increasing their bottom line. And so it was a really easy decision for a lot of candidates to make, to reject corporate PAC money, as you said. So in that cycle, 2018, about 200 candidates made that choice, and we actually flipped the House with candidates that were rejecting corporate PAC money. More importantly, they campaigned on this issue, and they said that the very first thing that should happen in the next Congress is that we needed to shore up our democracy, that we needed to protect the freedom to vote, we needed to end partisan gerrymandering, we needed to get the big money and dark money out of our politics. And so the very first bill in 2019, led by Speaker Pelosi, was H.R. 1, the For the People Act, which did all of those things. And in 2020, after that bill died in Senate Mitch McConnell's graveyard, we then did the same thing in the Senate and helped elect senators who would make this a priority. And what we saw was that both Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer made this the first legislative priority in this Congress. Mm-hmm. And now we're very close to getting it passed into law. So the fact is it's not true that nobody's going to do anything about this. We have one party right now, the Democratic Party, that's fighting every single day to get these bills passed that would clean up the money in our politics. But frankly, Republicans are filibustering and obstructing because they know that that dark money is helping fuel electoral success for them. So that is why we are working so hard day and night to pass the Freedom to Vote Act.
So you talked about the For the People Act, and then you just mentioned the Freedom to Vote Act. Just connect them for everybody.
Yes, sorry about that. The Freedom to Vote Act is the compromise for the People Act that was the compromise that was led by Senator Manchin. So it's based on the same pillars as the For the People Act and does the same thing.
Yeah, people have a tough time. Citizens have a tough time understanding, and I think this week was a great example of the sausage being made in Congress. Yeah. And for those who don't have the stomach for it, it's a terrifying experience, right? And many people watch this week with their palms sweating, and I'm confident that we're going to get a lot accomplished out of this Congress. There's some other legislative things that you also look at. Talk about the Democracy for All Amendment or the Disclose Act, and how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah, we have a scorecard where we actually rank every single member of Congress every year on basically their leadership on these issues. And one of the pieces of legislation that we look at is a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, called the Democracy for All Amendment. Mm-hmm. We need either the Supreme Court to overrule their previous ruling, or we need a constitutional amendment in order to overturn that ruling. And look, here's the good news, is the people are with us. Even 70% of Republicans want to see Citizens United overturned because it is hurting our democracy. So we actually feel very strongly that this is something that the people are for, and that's the greatest power in our democracy is the people. Along the lines, you also talked about the Disclose Act. That would say if you're going to spend money in our politics and to influence our elections, you have to tell us where your money is coming from. And prior to the Citizens United decision, 80% of the money in our elections was disclosed. We could trace it back to its original source. Right now, that number is somewhere around only about 30% of the money can we trace back to its original source.
Whoa, go slow. That's so stunning, you need to say it twice.
So prior to Citizens United, we could trace back to its original source 80% of the money spent in our elections. So there was less money in our elections, and we knew where it was coming from. And we, therefore, could kind of evaluate why they were spending it. Today, there is 10 times more money, and we can only trace back about 30% of the money to its original source, which means we don't, all of your listeners have seen those ads that come from groups that say things like Americans for Better Puppies, right? And the fact of the matter is that a lot of times we don't know who's funding that or why they're funding it. Pharma right now has been spending a lot of money across the country on these dark money ads to stop the lowering prescription drug negotiation proposal that's being debated in Congress, just as one example. So normally it's special interests or really rich billionaires who are funding these things to help get what they want out of the policy.
Right, in secret.
That's right, in secret, where we can't even see who it is. That's right.
Yeah, and just to remind listeners, there were a lot of horrors in that decision, but in preparation, Tiffany, for talking to you, I went and polled Citizens United and read the whole decision and read all 90 pages of Justice Stevens' dissent. And he makes a number of points, but one of them, which I had either never known or had forgotten, was that even though Congress, when they enacted laws that controlled spending in campaigns, they had evidentiary hearings where they gathered a lot of facts about the damage money was doing to our democracy, that the Supreme Court made this a facial ruling where they considered no facts whatsoever when they decided this was so important they had to change the way we do our politics in America and unleash this monster.
Yeah. First of all, that's a really big decision, so I am super impressed that you went and read the whole thing. And the dissent by Justice Stevens is just brilliant.
Brilliant.
But that's exactly right. This was an activist ruling. This was a judicial activist ruling where they went far outside the scope of what was actually being presented in this case about a corporation that was trying to run an ad against Hillary Clinton in the 2008 campaign.
Yep.
They went far outside of that to strike down basically all of the campaign finance, or a lot of the campaign finance laws that our system had in place. There are a couple of things. Point one, even in that really bad decision, though, 8 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices said that disclosure and transparency was vital for a functioning democracy. So even Justice Scalia said that we had to have full disclosure and transparency. That's point one.
Wait, but stay with point one. Don't leave it yet. But we don't.
That's true. And that's exactly right, which is why we are fighting to pass the Disclose Act.
Right.
So that we will have it.
And who was
that is in the Freedom to Vote Act.
And who was the 9th justice who couldn't even see that far?
Justice Thomas.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to, later on, if we have time in the show, I'm not going to take your time for it. I'll read some of the dissent for everybody.
It really is a brilliant dissent.
Yep.
And point two is that what we have seen from this Supreme Court is that the money hasn't just captured Congress, it has captured our judiciary as well. And that's really scary. It's also really important to know. I think one of the things that is overlooked is how much dark money was spent, meaning that undisclosed money was spent to get the last 3 Supreme Court nominees confirmed. Almost $35 million was spent for Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett to get them placed on the court.
Yes, and the whole mechanism behind the Federalist Society and the infiltration of the judiciary is funded by dark money.
That's right. That's right. And now what we're seeing is then this same Supreme Court that made the Citizens United ruling, then in 2013 made the Shelby v. Holder ruling that stripped and gutted the Voting Rights Act.
Yep.
And then we saw and what we're seeing is voting suppression and the biggest attack on voting rights since Jim Crow era. And then even just this year, they made 2 really awful decisions again. They made the Brenovich decision, which further stripped the Voting Rights Act, and they made a ruling for Americans for Prosperity, a Koch-funded dark money group that basically further protected dark money and undisclosed money.
And these are some of the same justices, some of them are the same justices who said disclosure was a requirement. And yet now, under all of this influence, they have a different point of view.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So the corruption from the money doesn't stop in Congress. It has actually captured executive agencies. It's captured the judiciary. It's filtered down to our state level politics. And it is absolutely hurting our democracy day in and day out.
Yeah, it's while I don't think it's been an issue in city council races, it has been an issue in school board races.
Yes, we're seeing that. It's also been an issue in mayor's races or
certainly in mayor's races. Yeah.
We have U.S. Senate races now where the total spending on one U.S. Senate race is over $100 million. I think actually one of them hit $200 million last cycle. That is just, it would have been unthinkable 10 years ago for a $200 million.
It should be unthinkable today. It should be.
Exactly.
Unthinkable.
Edwin, I feel like we've given your listeners a lot of reason to have heartburn and concern about this, and obviously we're fighting this every single day. I do think that there's also reason to have hope, and part of that brings me hope every single day is just how much people care about this issue and how they see it directly impacting their life and how they want it changed, right? You said it at the top of this segment. I mean, we have 4 million members and 800,000 donors. That's because people care about this. They want to see a government that truly reflects the people and that is responsive to the people and not just special interests. And so I think at the end of the day, there's no doubt this is a really hard fight, but it's why I have hope that at the end of the day, we are going to win this.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, and I think we win it because Americans have a taste for democracy, because the relationship with local elected officials like you were is so powerful and people want it and understand it. And at the national level, I think they're appalled to have their voice taken by big money, although that big money has funded so many lies and so much propaganda that not all of them fully understand what's going on. And after all, it's complicated. But that's why we talk, and there are heroes like you out there. And all of this gives me confidence that if we continue to fight, and I think we will. I think the right wing calls us snowflakes and thinks we'll melt away, but they underestimate our resolve to fight and to fight as hard as we can and ultimately to prevail. And I believe we will. And history will write interesting things about this time.
I could not agree more. There is not a more important fight that I can imagine being involved in than the fight to get money out of politics and to protect the freedom to vote. It truly goes to the heart of everything that we care about in this country. So it's a fight that I am proud to be in every day, and so grateful for partners like you that are in this fight too.
You are fabulous. I'm thrilled that you joined us and gave us part of your Saturday. We'll keep following your work, and maybe we will talk again soon.
That would be great. Thanks so much for having me on.
You bet. That was Tiffany Muller, the fabulous head of End Citizens United, and I urge all of you to go to their website, look at the work, join this campaign to get this terrible dark money out of our politics. And we are going to take a quick break, and I will be back at 773-763-9278 in just a moment with another remarkable woman, Barbara Flynn Curry.
This is John Daniel, President and Business Manager of the Sheet Metal Workers of Smart Local 265. The principles that guide me are rooted in the simple belief that united we stand and divided we fall. We the people must recognize that a diverse environment with unique points of view is a foundation for success. A culture where labor and management work together inspires innovation, promotes inclusion, creates a sustainable growth for business, the workforce, and our communities. When the entrepreneur's vision is developed and improved with the voice of a unionized workforce, you build more than just a product, you build a stronger future. I want to personally thank everyone who voted for President Biden. He believes in unions. Blue Collar Biden signed the American Rescue Act of 2021, which secures vested pension benefits. It funds improvements of indoor air quality in K-12 schools and provides additional Paycheck Protection Program loans to support small businesses. This is John Daniel from Smart Local 265. Join me in celebrating a return to sanity and a sustainable middle class. Stay union strong.
By texting 64000, you agree to receive recurring automated marketing messages from Eucora. Message and data rates may apply. No purchase required. TNC and privacy policy found at eucora.com/TNC.
I've always gotten UTIs. Cranberry products never worked for me, and I felt like I was out of options. I'm Jenna. My experience inspired me to start Eucora. Just mix a packet of Eucora with water and drink it to flush your urinary tract. Get your life back with Eucora. Get 30% off Eucora when you text HEALTH to 64,000. To get 30% off, text HEALTH to 64000.
Susan, I'm sorry I'm late. Traffic is terrible.
It sure is. But on top of that, gas prices have been skyrocketing. I can't believe how expensive gas has gotten recently.
Prices at the pump are up, but I never pay full price for gas anymore. I just use the free Get Upside Gas app that pays you cash back for every gallon of gas you buy.
Wait a minute. Are you saying you actually get paid cash when you buy gas with the Get Upside app?
Yes, up to 25 cents a gallon cash back every time I buy gas.
And does that actually add up to anything?
Some months I make $200 to $300.
Wow, that's serious extra cash. I'm downloading the free Get Upside app now.
Download the free Get Upside app now in the App Store or Google Play to save up to 25 cents a gallon when you buy gas. Use promo code BILL for a 25 cents a gallon bonus on your first tank. That's up to 50 cents a gallon on your first fill-up. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or any gift card for Amazon and other brands. Just download the free Get Upside app and use promo code BILL for up to 50 cents a gallon cash back on your first tank. That's code BILL.
I'm David Hochberg. It's Saturday. You're a veteran who served our country and can use a VA loan to either purchase a new home or refinance your existing home, but you don't know who you can trust. Team Hochberg respects your service and has VA loan experts available right now to answer your questions and help you secure a VA loan. Team Hochberg has helped thousands of radio listeners secure VA loans, but we can't help if you don't call 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. Homeside Financial Legal Housing Lender, NMLS 1124061.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Hey, everybody. Barbara Flynn Curry served in the Illinois House from, she'll correct me if I'm wrong, 1979 to 2019. And for the last 12 of those years, she was majority leader. She was part of a lot of really important legislative fights, but at least I think she was part of something bigger than any legislative fights. She went to the House in a time when there were very few women in elective office anywhere. And in part because of her leadership, the world is a very different place now, with women serving in important roles, not just in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. Hi, Barbara.
How are you, Ed? It's nice to be with you.
Oh, I'm thrilled you're here. Did you see that amazing testimony from members of the House, not the Illinois House, the House in D.C., where they talked about abortion this week?
Yes, amazing.
I mean, pro and con. I mean, in fairness, leaving the issue of abortion aside for a minute, just the fact that there were women able to have this conversation, a conversation that is as important as it would have been unimaginable a few years ago.
Exactly right. And from my perspective, the more women are willing to talk about what has happened to them, the more acceptance there will be of abortion as part of the basic rights of this society, of the United States government. I do believe that part of the reason that we have so quickly accepted the idea of gay marriage and gay rights is because we know a lot of people who are gay. They were willing to come out. They were willing to show us who they were.
Yep.
And once that happens, it's hard to make them into sort of horror creatures. It's hard to call them the other. It's hard to call them them. So I think that this was a very healthy sign for women to be talking about their own life experiences.
Right. In that setting. I mean, I nearly wept. I thought it was amazing and important. So today, even though women make up, 60% of college students, we're seeing some progress, but education, I think, is often not enough. Networks matter, mentors matter, professional support is necessary. And you've been part of that. You want to talk about I Will and what that's all about?
I'd be very happy to. The I Will Training Academy The leader of the group, the person whose great idea this was, is Loretta Durbin, the wife of our United States Senator Dick Durbin, although in our I Will Training Academy language, we call him her husband rather than calling her. The idea was born in 2000 at the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Illinois women came together and said, what we need to do is find a way to train pro-choice Democratic women who are interested in running for public office or interested in having a major say in public policy decisions. We need to give them the tools they need in order to be able, once they've decided to run, to win. And we've been very successful. Our first class was the class of 2002. So next year will be our 20th anniversary of actually churning out well-organized, well-fortified women who can next be seen on the campaign trail.
Do you want to talk about some of your, some of the remarkable people who've been through the program?
I'd be happy to. One of them, of course, is our Lieutenant Governor, Juliana Stratton, Nancy Rotering, the mayor of Highland Park, two Congresswomen, Sherry Bustos and Marie Newman. Deborah Shore was one of our early successes. She's at the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, and in fact, 4 of the 9 members of that district, a majority of the quorum, are I Will graduates. Besides Deborah, we have Kim Dubaclay, we have Justina Morita, and we have Carrie Steele. So, if you go downstate, if you look at the boards and commissions, the school boards, the city councils, you will find I Will alum all over the place. I believe that we calculated that at the moment, 70 alumni are in public office, but many have already done time in public office and have moved on to something else. So I think at one point we saw some 200 of our 250 graduates running for public office. Some of them, of course, were running more than once, so it's not, you can't quite say, okay, if 200 ran, does that mean 200 separate people, 200 separate offices? Probably not. Many of them may have started out small and then moved to bigger things.
That's a very impressive list of people. And so what would you say to women who are listening if they are on the fence about reaching out for help?
I would say go for it. The only thing stopping you is you. So we take 12 women from across the state every year for our delegate training program. It's a small number, but it's important to keep the class size relatively small. We cover major expenses, so it isn't taking a huge chunk out of the family checkbook, and we provide 8 sessions during the course of the year, fairly intense sessions. How do you raise campaign money? What's your message? How do you put together a campaign ad? How do you put together a finance committee? All the basics, all the nuts and bolts. But many people, women as well as men, are not familiar with the how-to of a successful electoral campaign, and that's what our job is. So I would welcome anyone who's listening who's the least bit interested. Have a look at our website, IWIL Training Academy. .org/apply. Have a look at the application and consider if you're the kind of woman that we need, and I can't imagine that you aren't.
And how about people who don't want to run but want to support the effort, maybe financially, maybe become mentors in some way? How does that process work?
First of all, we have a couple of major fundraisers every year. This year, our big fundraiser, which will be held, unfortunately, virtually, is October 13th, and we are honoring a trailblazer, Lisa Madigan. She was one of the founding mothers of I Will in 2000, as was I, as was Margaret Blackshear, who was the first and so far the leader of the state Fed, the state federation, the state AFL-CIO. Billy Page, a long time someone involved in state government, Deshauna Fournay. We had just a group of terrific women who said, yeah, this is a great mission, we will support it. So another thing you can do if you go to our website is figure out how you can contribute to the fundraiser October 13th. As I say, we provide the basic funding for the program. So it's important that we raise money from like-minded people, men as well as women, so that we have a chance to make sure that each delegate class gets the best in terms of information and the how-to. So apply, go to the website, you can apply, go to the website, and you can contribute.
Right. And you can also just get motivated, because as not only Barbara is saying, but as Tiffany Muller said before, our democracy needs people who are willing to put themselves on the line, who are willing to go out there and raise your hand, do the hard work, not just of getting elected, but do the hard work of governing, which, is not for the faint of heart.
Yep. Well, but that's a really important message, Ed. What you're saying is, don't stand in your own little corner and fetch. Don't just say, "Oh, I'm bemoaning the fact that things aren't working the way they ought to be working." Get out there and do it. Don't hang back.
And there are so many ways people can contribute to righting this ship, to moving our country in a better direction, to preserving our democracy against the current threat it's under. Some of it is by going out and running for office. Absolutely. Some of it's by funding other talented people who are going to do the work that's necessary, not just grandstand, but do the work. And you're helping people learn how to win and how to govern.
Exactly, and that's very important to us. We spend time on things like labor history in the state of Illinois. We talk about a big part of our program is Southern Illinois. I think those of us upstates forget that there is a whole Illinois south of I-80, and there was a wonderful woman named Barb Brown who taught political science.
Loved Barb Brown.
Yeah, well, and she was one of the veterans too. And every year we do a program in Southern Illinois in honor of her. Mm-hmm. But it's an eye-opener for the delegates from upstate to find out how differently people think in different parts of the state. So we're trying to instill in people an understanding of the variety of values that motivate people in Illinois.
Yep.
And the history of the state.
Right. It's a big and diverse state, and so it's a microcosm of the issues that the whole country faces. And if you learn about them here, you'll be better able to understand and to impact what's going on in the whole country.
Absolutely right.
And should we motivate people to go get to know the South, the state, better as we approach the beautiful leaf season? You can go up to Wisconsin, you can go up to northern Michigan, but you can go to the Garden of the Gods in southern Illinois. It's beautiful as any place in the country.
The colors will be a little later in southern Illinois than they will be in northern Michigan.
Right, yeah, you could do both. Well, Barbara, it's a pleasure talking to you. I'm glad you gave me part of your Saturday.
I was delighted to do it, Ed. It's always good to be in touch with you and give my best to your mom.
I will do that.
Okay.
All righty.
iwilltrainingacademy.org.
You heard it here. Thank you, Barbara.
We need you on every level.
We'll take a break, and we will be right back. And I want to take your calls at 773-763-9278.
O'Reilly Auto Parts specializes in keeping your car on the road. Not sure how much life is left in your battery? Our professional parts people will test it for free. If it does need to be replaced, we'll help you find just the right one to fit your car. Our Superstart batteries are built to handle even the toughest conditions. Visit O'Reilly Auto Parts today.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
This is Gary Menzel from Roofers and Waterproofers Local 11. If you're looking to have a new roof installed this year, let Local 11 Residential Roofers Union send out Filato Construction, serving Plainfield, Joliet, Crest Hill, and the south suburbs. Filato Construction employs skilled and trained OSHA 10-hour certified workers who will work safely while on your roof. Local 11 residential roofers earn a living wage and receive family health care and a retirement pension for their hard work. When you hire Filato Construction, you get competitive pricing, professional union installers, and the peace of mind knowing the job was done right. So if you're a homeowner or a part of a homeowners association and you're tired of a leaky roof or tired of the neighborhood roofer who just can't seem to get it done right, Give Filato Construction a call at 815-740-5461. Filato Construction also installs solar roofing with a certified Local 134 electrician. Learn more about residential roofing at rooferslocal11.org.
The old way of living with diabetes is a pain. You've got to remember to do your testing, and you always need to be sticking your fingers. The new way to live your life with diabetes is with a continuous glucose monitor. You simply apply a discreet, easy-to-use sensor on your body, and it continuously monitors your glucose levels, helping you spend more time in range and freeing you from painful finger pricks. If you test your blood sugar at least 4 times per day and inject insulin at least 3 times per day, or use an insulin pump and have private insurance or Medicare, you might be eligible for a CGM with little or no cost to you. Call U.S. Medical Supply today for a free benefits check. We offer free shipping, 90-day supplies, and we bill Medicare or your insurance directly. Call now and say goodbye to finger pricks.
800-417-0851. 800-417-0851. 800-417-0851. That's 800-417-0851.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Hey, we're back, 773-763-9278. I wasn't planning on making this show about women's rights or reproductive rights, but Barbara has inspired me a little bit, and I think I want to take a minute just to tell everybody, if they don't know, that, you know, there's the annual Women's March, really this huge set of protests that began the year after Trump was elected. This year, the focus is reproductive rights. It's going on now in cities across the country. Lots of people marching downtown Chicago, thousands, and I think 80,000 in Austin, Texas, where they passed that ridiculous, surely illegal, crazy law that just says anybody can be a bounty hunter and turn in their neighbor if they think somebody's driving them to talk to a doctor about an abortion. Ridiculous. That's going on right now, and if you want to, put me in your headphones and head down to the march, that would be a great thing. And it's in cities all over the country. Hey, I promised I would read a little bit from the decision, and it's the Citizens United decision. And I just, the dissent written by Chicago's Justice Stevens says a number of things, including this: the court's ruling threatens to undermine the integrity of elected institutions across the nation. The path it has taken to reach its outcome, I fear, will do damage to this institution. By this institution, he means the Supreme Court. Okay, so it's been just over a decade, and now we have our democracy undermined in a way that it hasn't been. And the Supreme Court's legitimacy is in all polling considered as low as it has been in memory. So he was exactly right in his prediction about what that decision would do. And you remember earlier I talked about this being what lawyers call facial inquiry. And let me just read you this paragraph because it's just important. The unnecessary resort to a facial inquiry runs contrary to the fundamental principle of judicial restraint that courts should neither anticipate a question of constitutional law in advance of necessity of deciding it, nor formulate a rule of constitutional law broader than is required by the precise facts to which it be applied. And that was a case he's quoting that's precedent for the Supreme Court. He goes on, scanting that principle threatens to short-circuit the democratic process by preventing laws embodying the will of the people from being implemented in a manner consistent with the Constitution. These concerns are heightened when judges overrule settled doctrine upon which the legislature has relied. Now remember, they did this with no evidence, notwithstanding the fact that the Congress had used lots of evidence in order to pass this. And so it's just a remarkable section where Justice Stevens puts to rest any possible claims by conservative justices to have used judicial restraint. And instead he outs them as the activist legislators that they are, intent on reshaping the country in their own image. And that's exactly what you heard Tiffany Muller talk about. Really important stuff. I'm going to go to the phones, and Steve, you're on.
Yes, I'm going to make a couple of points. And to the topic that you just raised, I have over the years yet to find anyone who can tell me how it is that the cause of democracy or the institutions that represent democracy are served by the interjection of more money. Whenever I ask that question of anybody, I have yet to get a satisfactory answer. Explain to me how we improve democracy by allowing people to interject more money, people with huge amounts of resources, given the disparities in terms of wealth in this country.
Steve, let me interrupt you for 1 second and just say you haven't found those people because they're few and far between. The public, by vast numbers in polls, supports restraint on this kind of money. It wasn't because it was popular that the Supreme Court did this. It wasn't because it was good for democracy that they did it. They did it because corporate interests, and not even every corporate interest, but really important, powerful ones, said, we need this.
Exactly. I mean, it's a decades for the conservatives in this country, and to their credit, they thought about this strategically. That we had the New Deal, we came out of the 1960s. America was heading in a very progressive direction, and so how can we reverse this? Well, we get people elected, especially to high office, like the presidency, and then what do? They nominate justices that in no way, shape, or form represent the mainstream of the scholarly community in terms of constitutional law, where we are as a society, and that sort of thing. No, just people who basically want some sort of interpretation of the Constitution that goes back 150 years. Isn't representative of contemporary views at all, and that's who we ended up with on the court. And so now we've got a stacked court, because of a system that is quite frankly flawed in terms of the way we nominate and get people on that court, and as a result of which you get these kinds of decisions. Now, the reason I had called in was to point out this whole number of problems in terms of getting people involved in public policy today. I mean, I agree. We need more people to stand up and want to participate in our democracy. At the same time, there's a lot of research out there that points to reasons as to why people don't do it. And when you get outside of elected office, you ask people in, for instance, the research community and the business community, all sorts of other communities, would you get involved? Would you run for office? And if not, why? Well, it turns out that, not surprisingly, people don't want to be scrutinized. People don't want to be attacked. And in today's day and age, they don't want to be doxxed. You know, this is not 30 years ago. Unfortunately, if you take a position today, we've all seen those videos of I'm not talking about high office. I'm talking about people who sit on school boards that need paid security or the police to escort them out of a school board meeting in America. I mean, this is ridiculous that it's come to this. So, you know, in that kind of environment, it's no wonder that people don't want to be a part of this process because, quite frankly, you know, they value their job. They value their family's security. And I don't know what the answer is, but that's what we're facing in today's day and age, that, you know, it's not simply a case of, okay, I'll go to the meetings, I'll participate, we'll make decisions, and that'll be that. Because that's what it used to be on a school board. But today, you might take your life in your hands going to a school board meeting in America.
Thank you, Steve, for that. As depressing as that is, there are a lot of people out there who are willing to raise their hand and fight this fight because our democracy's worth it. And in a footnote, and this is how nerdy I am, I read the footnotes even to this Citizens United decision. One of the footnotes, Justice Stevens quotes Thomas Jefferson. And this is what Thomas Jefferson said about corporate, and again, it was a little different legal structure, but they had corporations even back then. He said, I hope we shall crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations, which dare already to challenge our government to a trial of strength and bid defiance to the laws of our country. The reason why that was in the footnote was that Stevens wanted to be sure to bury the right wing's intellectually indefensible commitment to so-called originalism. He proved by citing Jefferson here that in fact the founders had no intention to open up corporate money in politics. It was just an utter lie. And I want to raise this now because in the conversations I'm about to have for the rest of the show, I'm going to outline for everybody just exactly what the right wing in America has unleashed on our democracy. And I think I mentioned before that my own brother has opted not to support candidates financially, in part because he believes that campaigns are too expensive and that there's too much money and that we'll never fix that problem. We are going to fix that problem. But it's really important that the facts get out clearly and courageously. And that's why, and I think you're going to see it, Democrats have to put aside some of our differences in order to save the democracy itself. Paul, is that somebody wanting to talk?
I got nothing.
Okay, good. Sometimes you can't tell when you look at the board here. So let me talk about. I promised a follow-up on something from last week, and I have a couple minutes. I want to do it right now. And that was my conversation with Saru Jaraiman about the need to pay tipped workers a minimum wage. A minimum wage. Many people let me know after we were on last week that they had no idea that there's a whole class of workers in America who are exempt from the minimum wage, who don't get it, who in fact get something called a sub-minimum wage on the theory that they'll get even with tips, and it doesn't happen. And not only doesn't it happen, but it happens less if you are female or if you're black, because people tip less. And there's a whole lot of harassment in that industry. And the studies show that when people are paid at least a minimum wage, there isn't that kind of harassment because people don't have to take it. They can say, you know what, I'm not going to stand here and put up with it. So I asked last week for anybody who, well, actually, I asked Saru how people could help, and she directed everybody to onefairwage.com. But she also said that we should tell the owners of restaurants we like, hey, we love the food, we want to come back, but we can only come back if you support minimum wage for all your workers. And I've done that, and I want to know from you if you have. Either call in and tell us or text me, I guess, through Twitter at Eisendrath. And just yes, if you've done it. I think it's really important. It was a lively conversation we had, but it kept going afterwards as I heard from more and more people that this was an important issue to them and would make a difference. I want to turn now to some local news before my next guest. And I'm interested in your thoughts on this, too. Mayor Lightfoot wants all city employees vaccinated. And she said, you either get vaccinated or, you can't be here. And that was something a lot of us applauded. But this week, she backed off that plan a little bit. And she backed off of it in a way that said, look, I really believe in it, but I got to back off of it. Because the move was opposed by the Fraternal Order of Police, and even the Chicago Federation of Labor was critical of it. I think they said, their quote was, it might harden the opposition to vaccines. I am a big fan of labor, and the CFL was my partner in the Sun-Times, but I have to say I'm disappointed. Vaccines work, period. And our city, everyone in it, and our economy needs to move forward. I applauded the mandate when the mayor announced it, and I am just sorry she was forced to back away now. And look, most police in Chicago, most police everywhere, they want to serve and protect. It's a tough job. Serve and protect, not serve and infect. The FOP in Chicago, their leadership is difficult. And as usual, they wrap their arms around their most extreme members rather than the great majority of hardworking and dedicated police officers in the city. And outside the police force, city workers are just like everybody else. Most are vaccinated, and they don't want to have to leave work. They don't want to have to go to work and sit next to someone who isn't. So I just think it's really disappointing. Oh, I have more to do on this, but I see we're, Paul, close to the top of the hour. So let's take our top of the hour break, and we'll be back at 773-763-9278 in just a moment.
NBC News Radio, I'm Brad Siegel. Women are speaking out in the nation's capital today against the most restrictive abortion law in recent U.S. history. Texas's new law banning abortions beyond 6 weeks went into effect last month. Now Mississippi is looking to ban abortions after 15 weeks, which has prompted fears of other states with already limited abortion access following suit.
I'm from West Virginia. We only have one abortion clinic, and it really puts a lot of women who are low income and single struggling.
This year's annual Women's March is taking place in more than 600 cities across the country. President Biden says Democrats will pass his economic agenda no matter how long it takes. Jim Forbes has the update.
The president met with Democrats on Capitol Hill Friday to rally support for the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which has been put on hold until Democrats agree on a much larger social spending package. Biden told reporters afterwards, quote, "We're going to get this done." When asked when, Biden said it doesn't matter if it's in 6 minutes, 6 days, or 6 weeks, we're going to get it done. Later on Friday, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent a letter to Democrats saying more time is needed on both bills. I'm Jim Forbes.
The Supreme Court is denying a request to block New York City's vaccine mandate for public school teachers. The deadline was 5 p.m. Friday for city school employees to get their first dose or face suspension or even possible termination. Justice Sonia Sotomayor denied the request by a group of teachers for an emergency injunction. A major energy company is planning to reduce its carbon footprint. Texas-based Phillips 66 says it wants to cut emissions by 30% by 2030. Its goal for other emissions, like those from jet fuel, is a 15% reduction from levels seen in 2019. And the jackpot for tonight's Powerball drawing is $635 million. Brad Siegel, NBC News Radio.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT Willow Springs is powered by ComEd. Lower your energy bills and reduce your carbon footprint with the ComEd Energy Efficiency Program.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, we are back at 773-763-9278, and I wanted, oh my God, I have so much I want to talk to you about today. It's just hard to know where to start. We were talking about the news. One of the other stories this week here in Chicago, we had a state trooper shot to death on the Dan Ryan. And our own Senator Dick Durbin, who we already talked about on this show as we talked about his fabulous wife Loretta and the organization that she founded. Dick and Loretta were driving home with another couple from a dinner. They were on DuSable Drive, what we used to call the Outer Drive, when they witnessed a shooting just this week. The city is in a tough spot with violence, violent crime, carjackings, and the like. There are a lot of efforts to do something about it, some more successful than others, and there's a lot of confusion about it. We have a lot of very difficult, hard work. I mean, the chaos that you see in Chicago is in part the result of decades of bad decisions. Bad social policy, bad education policy, bad economic policy, leaving people out, and not helping families who are strained to the limit, not helping them raise their children in ways that we could do. And there's a lot of effort in the bills in Washington to help in communities that are in such distress. That's why it's just so important that we move forward on Biden's agenda. But remember, I've said we face these three linked crises right now. Climate change is a global threat. Creating the world's first multiracial polity is our social challenge. And of course, preserving and strengthen our democracies, our political fight. And they're deeply, deeply linked. You have incumbent energy companies funding, efforts to block the Build Back Better agenda, and racial animosity is at the core of the Fox universe, I guess you could call it, or Trump universe. They're the same thing. Efforts to spread doubt about our elections. And we've spent some time on dark money already, but it's led to this radical undermining of our democratic systems. And in that gap, you have an affirmative effort by Trump and his cronies, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, to actually overturn the last election and to plot to do it again in the future. And it's really important to understand how they're linked. So we allowed, a decade ago, dark money to flood into our politics. We don't know where most of it comes from now, and it is billions of dollars, right? That's in there. We have this unprecedented, dishonest propaganda campaign that you spend a half hour in primetime watching Fox, make your head spin, telling Americans absolute lies. And it almost doesn't matter what lies they are, because they're not designed to convince anybody of anything. They really don't care if you believe that horse tranquilizer cures COVID. They really don't believe if you think bleach cures COVID. All they want is you to doubt what the government is telling you is the right information. For the same reason, they're telling you over and over and over again, hey, we counted the votes. We know we didn't get the most votes, but we need another investigation into fraud. We need to do it again and again and again, because you know what? We didn't lose, even though they say we didn't have the votes. Why? Because they need doubt and confusion. And we have an enormous amount of data about the danger to democracies when there's this kind of doubt, when there's this kind of confusion. And what happens is someone takes advantage of it. They take advantage of it by actually trying to say the votes don't matter. And here we're doing it in three ways. And you're going to hear about this in our next interview. Those three ways are gerrymandering, which means the votes don't count as much. It means election suppression, which means it's harder to vote. And it means actually overturning the results of elections, which is what these laws allow partisan actors to do. And that is absolutely shameful, dangerous, and we have to fight it. But I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to hear from some journalists who've looked at it, and that's what we're going to do for much of the rest of the time here. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some history, because we actually have precedents for this. In my view, the time we're living in is almost, it is important ways like the end of Reconstruction. We're seeing an enormous backlash. It's partially based on racial animosity. And back then, they created such confusion about the election and the democracy. And this was right after the Civil War, where we couldn't tell in some cases who won an election. And I'm going to tell you next week about Louisiana and some of their gubernatorial elections in the 1870s that led to both sides arming up, that led to one of the most shameful slaughters of American citizens, in this case, almost entirely black citizens in Colfax, Louisiana. These are really important bits of history we must understand if we're going to take this on in the way we need to take it on. And I can't wait for you to hear my conversation with The Guardian's fabulous reporter who's covered elections so much. We've actually talked to him before. He's a terrific guy. And I'm going to get to him after I take a call from Roosevelt. Roosevelt, you're on.
Edwin, I apologize by not saying welcome to the family. 820 WCPT. I really like your show. I really like you, actually.
Well, thank you.
Maybe it's because I'm biased, because I agree with you 99.9% of the time.
Well, confirmation bias is dangerous, so I'm glad you agree with me, but find some other people who don't and ask them to listen.
Believe me, that's what I was going. There's a woman that has her own show. She happens to be, I'm Mexican myself, and so is she. And she has a business. She has her own show on another station, way up the dial, in Spanish. And what I'm getting at is that she has people that call up and say some ridiculous things like you're being shot up by, in other words, the vaccine has chips.
Yes, right. There's a lot of that going around. Yep.
Yeah. And these are people educated. Some of them are, people that have degrees and everything, and that's what surprises me. I mean, if you're a retired teacher, which is one of the regular callers, you're a retired teacher, you don't believe in science? I mean, teachers teach science in school. But but they're not taking a religious side. They're taking a side that, I'll give you the perfect example. The lady I was talking about that has the business, that has the show, says, the government is not going to force me to take a vaccine I don't want to take. So in return, I told her, well, what if we just choose the ones we like picking avocados or cherries or whatever. I go, you must have grandchildren. Oh, but that's just for me. That's me. But what I was going to get also is I wanted to see what your opinion is. Why is there so much violence against people that, like the young lady in New York that asked 3 gentlemen that were from Texas for proof of vaccine, and they beat her up and I think they killed her. I'm not sure whether she died or not. But why do you think there's so much violence? That's my rhetorical question to you.
Okay. Well, thank you for calling, Roosevelt. Let's take a second on those questions. The first one you asked is, how is it that otherwise educated people can believe things that for which there is no evidence, can believe things, in fact, when the evidence is contrary? And the answer to that is that the mind is a complicated place. We tell ourselves stories. We try and make sense of the world. And if the bulk of the society we live in, the bubble we're in, if you will, is telling us one thing, and then you know what, it can start to make sense. I mean, history is filled with outrageous errors in judgment that everybody made at the same time, whether it is the earth is flat, or heavier objects fall faster than lighter ones, or for a long time the earth is the center of the solar system, or the price of tulips should be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, which was a tulip bubble that happened in Europe in I think it was the 1600s. There are these grand, massive delusions that happen, and they take a long time to undo. Our time is not unique in that, and we have some of the features that have been. The internet makes it easier to get information in your bubble. Now, it makes it easier to get information out of your bubble too, but you have to work a little bit to do it. And I urge people to do it. I spend some time looking at Fox. It is a shocking experience, but I do it. Anyway, the confirmation bias is powerful, and if you're in a network, people can, a network of propaganda can be successful. We've seen that to humanity's detriment time and time again. And let me link this back to the dark money conversation we had, the danger that was unleashed by this terrible Citizens United ruling more than a decade ago. Now there's enormous funding for lies, for a whole ecosystem of lies that have captured many people's imaginations and misled them into many things. And we have in hospitals today people dying of COVID while they are yelling at their doctors that they're being lied to, they don't have COVID. And heartbreaking, just heartbreaking for the medical staff who've seen this. And I know this because someone I know this is what she does for a living. And she has told my wife and I about this happening on her ward in hospitals. And it's almost unimaginable. But that is the power of the propaganda and the lies that we are up against. So that's the part about believing. And threats to your belief system are not always taken easily by people. And that really also partly explains the violence you're talking about. Reality is not their views, their misguided views on COVID, but also on the election, are not being confirmed by reality. In fact, reality is biting them in the backside, and they don't like it. And we had a president in Donald Trump who encouraged thuggish, violent behavior wherever he could. It was his signature. Cruelty was part of the brand. Let's rip children from their parents' arms and put them in cages was part of what they were about. Just imagine that being back in power. It's enough to make you sick. And it's one of the reasons why I am confident we will do everything we can to save our democracy. Anyway, I thank you for your call. Are we going to break? All right, we're going to go to break, and when we get back, the Guardian Sam Levine joins me.
This is John Daniel, President and Business Manager of the Sheet Metal Workers of Smart Local 265. The principles that guide me are rooted in the simple belief that united we stand and divided we fall. We the people must recognize that a diverse environment with unique points of view is the foundation for success. A culture where labor and management work together inspires innovation, promotes inclusion, creates a sustainable growth for business, the workforce, and our communities. When the entrepreneur's vision is developed and improved with the voice of a unionized workforce, you build more than just a product, you build a stronger future. I want to personally thank everyone who voted for President Biden. He believes in unions. Blue Collar Biden signed the American Rescue Act of 2021, which secures vested pension benefits. It funds improvements of indoor air quality in K-12 schools and provides additional Paycheck Protection Program loans to support small businesses. This is John Daniel from Smart Local 265. Join me in celebrating a return to sanity and a sustainable middle class. Stay union strong.
I'm David Hochberg. It's Saturday, and you're constantly complaining about paying PMI on your FHA loan, but you've done nothing about it. If you took out a 30-year fixed loan after June of 2013 and your loan-to-value was greater than 90%, you will have PMI for the entire length of your loan. Team Hochberg has helped thousands of radio listeners refinance out of their FHA loan to eliminate their PMI, but we can't help if you don't call 855-563-2843 or visit 56david.com. Also, financial legal housing lender, MLS 1124061.
Hi everyone, Tooth19 here. Did you ever wonder why in a world as advanced as ours, where common man can travel to space and back, why we can't provide an easier way to do dentistry? I wonder all the time. I would love to have a dental appointment that's fast, no noise, no anxiety, no gagging, and no bad tasting stuff. Well, the staff at Total Dentistry told me that's possible with sedation dentistry. It's a calm, relaxed way to get treatment. So those worries, like gagging or anxiety, become minimized by the sedation. And for those with busy lifestyles where 4 to 5 appointments isn't practical, one-day dentistry with sedation is the perfect solution. I wonder if Dr. Pelican Total Dentistry will be our first floating dental office in space. Total Dentistry, a general dental practice like no other. Call 847-358-2477 for your free sedation consultation today. 847-358-2477.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, we're back. A few weeks ago, I had Sam Levine on from The Guardian, and he spent time talking about what the Texas law does to voting rights. And I told him at the time I wanted to follow up with him because there's so much going on state after state around the nation. And I did have a chance to catch up with him, and just yesterday, in fact, and I want you to hear what we talked about. Okay, The Guardian, Sam Levine, is back with us again to update us on various efforts to change voting laws around America. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Edwin, how are you?
Terrific. But worried. I'd say I'm good, but I'm worried. Can you talk to us about just the current state of, I know no one follows more closely than you do, the laws around the country that have been introduced, that have been passed, changing the way we vote in America. So can you talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened in the last few months, both laws that make it harder to vote and who it makes it harder, for whom it makes it harder to vote, but also second, and I think more ominously, the laws that create a sort of partisan mechanism to control the outcome of elections?
Sure. Well, since the 2020 election, we've just seen a wave of laws across the country that are clearly taking aim at many of the policies and procedures that were used to make the 2020 election one of the most secure elections in U.S. history. We're seeing laws in places like Georgia and Texas and Florida that take aim at mail-in voting, a process that really exploded in 2020 for a lot of reasons, one of which was the pandemic and people not wanting to vote in person, and making it so that people have to do things like provide their driver's license number or the last four digits of their Social Security number when they send in a mail-in ballot application and a mail-in ballot. Eliminating absentee ballot drop-offs is something that was widely used across the country, that voters really like to be able to go and just return their ballot directly instead of having to put it in the mail. We've seen Republican state legislatures really restrict or in some cases outlaw that process. And these are policies that will make it harder to vote for people who already face, the most significant barriers to vote. And we know those are people who might not be able to take time off from work, who, might not be able to go and vote on election day, and who might need additional, options available to them to go and vote. People who might not have a driver's license or a form of ID, things like that. And we've really seen several laws that have put those new barriers in place.
Sam, so let me interrupt for 1 second. And who are those people most likely? The ones who work odd-hour shifts or who may not have a driver's license? Who's impacted most? What kinds of voters?
Well, we know that the people who are most likely to be impacted, who tend to face more difficulty in getting to the polls, are voters of color. It might be people who and people and the poor, people who don't have high-paying jobs.
That's very important. So if these laws are going to be challenged, and we know the Supreme Court said things like gerrymandering can't be challenged, and so they've said sort of political motives can't be challenged in a number of cases, but there's still laws that say you can't discriminate based on race, and these do tend to have a higher impact on people of color.
That's right. There are already a flood of lawsuits from civil rights groups that are aggressively challenging these laws based on the protections of the 14th Amendment in the Constitution, which guarantees equal protection under the law, the 15th Amendment, which says the right to vote can't be denied based on someone's race, under the remaining provisions of the Voting Rights Act that are in full effect that guarantee voting protections to certain groups. So there's been a very aggressive effort to challenge those laws in the courts, and we'll see how that plays out. I think one thing we saw last year during the 2020 election is that the federal judiciary, particularly at the appellate level, so the circuit courts and the Supreme Courts, has not been particularly receptive to these kinds of lawsuits. They've been willing to kind of defer to state legislatures in upholding these laws. So I think, it will be a challenging fight in the courts, but I think civil rights groups are bringing using every tool at their disposal to challenge these laws.
Okay, so far we've talked about the laws that make it harder to vote, and you say a whole slew of these laws have been introduced since we had a completely fair and open election that some people just didn't like the results. And you say a slew. My understanding, it's something like 180 bills introduced across the country. I mean, in most states, right? Now they're not all moving forward, but a lot of bills were introduced.
Yeah, there have been hundreds of bills that have been introduced. The Brennan Center for Justice, which is a nonprofit in New York, has done a really good job at keeping track of those. And there have been dozens of laws that have been, enacted. And we've seen it in some of the key states from the 2020 election that will play a key role both in the midterm elections next year and in the next presidential election in 2024. Again, these are places like Texas, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, all very politically competitive states that are really on the brink of significant demographic change that are really putting new barriers in place to make it harder to vote.
I think the legislature in Wisconsin passed something, but Governor Evers vetoed it. It's my understanding that it's not enacted yet. Is that right?
That's right. There are three of the key swing states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all have Republican legislatures that have sought to implement new voting restrictions and have seen their Democratic governors veto them. In Michigan, the Republican legislature there's a maneuver to use a ballot initiative to kind of go around a gubernatorial veto. So right now there's an effort playing out where activists are collecting signatures to try and get a ballot referendum on several of the measures that were already rejected by the governor that would allow them to go around her. And then obviously in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the Democratic governors there have sort of served as a check on the legislatures. But those three governors are all up for re-election next year, and I expect that voting rights, the consequences for what will happen in elections, as a result of those gubernatorial races, is an issue that's really going to be at the center of a lot of those campaigns.
Yeah, it turns out this is a period in American history where democracy's on the ballot all over the place. And it's just shocking,
right. That's a good way of saying it.
Yeah. So, all right. So we've now just talked about the aspects of these laws that, and let's be clear, there are other election-related laws pushed by Democrats to increase things like, or to protect things like mail-in voting. But the ones we're talking about now that limit the ability to vote, that circumscribe it, make it harder to vote, are all being pushed by Republican legislatures and in key states. But there are other aspects of this, not just the voter suppression aspects of these laws. There are more ominous parts, like the criminalizing of certain behaviors on the parts of election officials, or the ability of legislatures to just say, hey, we're decertifying, we're not going to certify this vote, we don't like it. Talk about the other aspects of these laws.
Yeah, experts I've talked to have started making a distinction in kind of the election laws that we're seeing. One group is laws that they consider kind of voter suppression, laws that change the rules of elections to make it harder to register to vote, to cast a ballot around elections. The other half, which I think is really a newer phenomenon that we've seen more after the election last year, is what they're calling election subversion. And that is policies that seek to invalidate election results to make it so that, you know, the legitimate winner of an election might not be seated in office. And there have been several concerning developments on that front. I think the most notable one has been in Georgia, where the state legislature passed a law that empowers the state elections board, which they also gave themselves new power to control. It empowers the state elections board to take over local boards of elections if the board determines that they are poor performing. And that's obviously something that a lot of people have expressed, you know, deep concern about. These local boards are places that do things like set, they have a say in, you know, early voting locations, voter registration policies. They can resolve key disputes over ballots. And obviously they play a huge role after an election in canvassing the vote. They're kind of the first layer in officializing the election results that are then moved up to the state, you know, to the state level.
Sam, you know what? This is an enormously important discussion that I'm having with Sam, but I need, because of the nature of the media here, to do something that we don't usually do here at WCPT, but we're going to bring you breaking news. I am going to call out to my colleague, Patty Vasquez, who is at the rally downtown. Hi, Patty. What are you seeing?
I just stepped away so that I'd be able to, so you could hear me. Otherwise, it would be a lot of chanting. And the rally started at Federal Plaza, and it was amazing. I mean, people from everywhere have come downtown to participate in this march. I don't have the numbers. Everyone's being very safe. Almost everyone's got their masks on, but the energy has been incredible, coming out to stand up for each other, for women's health rights, for autonomy, and the right to choose our own futures. And it's really been, I think, you know, especially with the pandemic, we tend to feel isolated and helpless, and I think this is a day where we've been, well, first of all, blessed with no rain and a little warm, and a lot of people who just wanted to be together and fight for justice. It's incredible.
Is it a big crowd?
It's a really big crowd. We marched. They had a pattern, and the police department, actually, one of the police officers came over to Indivisible Chicago Volunteers and said, "It was a great turnout. Congratulations on your event." Which was wonderful.
Yep. So a lot of people are out there, and are people talking to each other about the sort of state of women's health and what's going on in Texas and what we can do about it?
Absolutely. Not just Texas, but Mississippi. I mean, all the states where they are drawing back the rights that we have fought for decades. Well, that we earned, and then know that a lot of folks thought it was done, and we've been lied to by legislators who told us, "Oh, don't worry about it. If we appoint Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, you won't have to worry about it. Roe v. Wade is a law of the land." And now we're seeing the ways in which these state governments, and you guys are talking about local elections, this is where it's important. And even though Illinois is considered to be one of the states that's most forward when it comes to abortion rights, reproductive rights, women's health, we still have a long way to go, and we need to continue to fight for all the states around us and encourage anybody who needs help that, yes, you can come to Illinois.
So Patty, were there speakers out there or just marchers?
No, there were speakers, there were a lot of volunteers, and there was, of course, a tiny counter protest. The religious right, the extremists are going to be out, but honestly, Edwin, it was like 4 people. It was devoured by this incredible group of people from all ages. I saw kids with sandwich boards and, starting the fight now. Moms had their kids with them from the ages of 4. I saw a woman with her walker, basically with a sign saying, "I can't believe I still have to do this." And we are not giving up the fight. I think that's clear, not just in this march in Chicago, but across the country and around the world. But yeah, I would say there were thousands. The march was great.
That's great.
Glad to be here.
Well, and people are respectful, and everybody's staying safe. And I mean, this is the kind of march that, later on we're going to hear on Fox News that there were all of these terribly rowdy people doing these terrible things in our cities, taking over streets. But you're telling me this was a peaceful, respectful march in favor of rights that are under dire attack.
Exactly. And so many people along the march route were cheering. We could see people in windows, especially by one of I can't remember which college we went by, but students in the windows waving and dancing. It was all positive, absolutely across the board. It was, there is nothing anyone could take away from this except that it was the right thing to do, actually.
Well, tell those students to get out of their dorm and get out on the street and join the effort.
I know. Hey, we'll take it. It helped with the energy with people who are marching to have people on the sidewalks and the windows cheering too, and honking horns when we went by traffic. Yeah, all of that matters.
All righty. Well, you stay safe out there, and thank you for reporting in.
Well, thank you for having me, and congratulations. It's great to be in the family with you.
I'm happy to be with you. Take care.
Have a good one. Bye, everyone.
That was our very own Patty Vasquez, who is out there at the march, and we're going to take a quick break, and then I'm going to get back to this discussion on election suppression and election subversion, very relevant to the topics that Patty was out there marching about. We'll be back in just a second.
We've all been spending more time indoors than usual, but FinishingChicago.com has an offer to update your interior. Whether your space is residential or commercial, for a limited time you can save up to 25% on painting and decorating. FinishingChicago.com has the most dynamic interior spaces available from industry-leading union craftspeople. That's union quality, efficiency, and industry-leading expertise in your home or commercial space. Visit FinishingChicago.com to find a contractor in your area. This unprecedented access to union quality labor at a reduced rate is only available for a limited time. Revitalize your spaces with fine decorative upgrades applied by the most knowledgeable craftspeople in the industry. Whether it's a new color or transforming your walls into something truly special, our contractors have all the options. Take advantage of FinishingChicago.com's Update Your Interior savings before they're gone. For up to 25% off your new finish, start with FinishingChicago.com.
But we have a truck leaving with a big order on Tuesday.
Tina's floor manager retired, leaving her tortilla factory flat out.
What do you mean she's on a silent retreat?
She must fill the role and all those orders.
Oversee production.
Indeed can help her hire great people fast.
I need Indeed.
Indeed you do. Schedule virtual interviews and talk to candidates right from your employer dashboard. Visit Indeed.com/credit and get $75 towards your first sponsored job. Terms and conditions apply.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Sam, what does poor performing mean? Is there a definition? Is it clear? Are there standards? Or can it be just I don't agree with them?
Well, I think that's part of I think it's not something that the board could come in and basically make up, but it's not clearly kind of defined and gives the board, I think, a lot of discretion to decide. But this kind of partisan interference in kind of the routine duties of election officials is something that is really, really concerning academics, I think, and people who follow this closely, because, given the enormous pressure that was on election officials after the 2020 election, and we saw election officials all over the country who kind of, refused to go along with requests to overturn elections, not certify votes. And that was kind of the bulwark that got the election, certified and protected. But if we have a system where there's more kind of partisan interference, where there's a chance to remove officials who aren't going along with these kinds of schemes, there's a concern that, this is kind of laying the groundwork for overturning an election.
And just so we're clear, the Georgia, which is the example you gave, is the state where the sitting president, President Trump, called the Secretary of State and said, I need you to find me those votes that'll put me over the top. And he said, they're not there. And this law that you're talking about, he no longer has any power. It's been stripped from the Secretary of State and given to this partisan board. Is that correct?
Well, the Secretary of State is still in Georgia is still the chief election official in Georgia, so he still plays a very big role in overseeing elections. He was previously the chair of the state elections board, and under this new law has been stripped of that role. So he still has a key role as the top chief election official, but is no longer the chair of the state elections board, which also plays a key role in running elections in Georgia.
Right, and with these new expanded powers you talked about.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I interrupted you. You were going to say something else.
I was going to say that the other development we're seeing is that in many states, the top election official is called the Secretary of State, and they are elected in partisan races. And what we've seen over the last several months is that there are people who have embraced some of the wildest conspiracies about the 2020 election, that the election was stolen, that votes were flipped, that Joe Biden wasn't really elected. We've seen people who have embraced those ideas start to run for Secretary of State. That's something that's happening in Georgia. It's something that's happening in Arizona. It's happening in Michigan. And that is a position from which, if elected, these candidates could wreak significant havoc on future elections. These are races that will be on the ballot next year in 2022. They have a key role in instructing, local officials how to implement statewide policies, and obviously play a key role in certification after the election. So if these candidates were to get into power, they could play a key role almost unilaterally in blocking certification of elections. And these are races that, typically do not get a ton of attention. They're considered down ballot races, not something that people attract a ton of money or a ton of, TV time, but really, really could have significant consequences in future elections.
Sam, let's take election subversion and suppression separately for a minute, and tell me on each of them, if you've talked to people who recognize any historical precedent in our democracy for what's going on.
Well, I think broadly that there is a recognition that any time there has been kind of increased turnout and kind of new political forces flexing their, political muscle, whether you look at, the U.S., after emancipation, or if you look at, the civil rights movement, there's been a backlash and there's been an effort to counter that kind of expansion of democracy with a restriction of it. I think it's not a controversial idea that when, people who have held power and who hold power, see something threatening that power, the human instinct is to do everything you can to hold on to it. And I think that this is seen as a new version of that, kind of these forces that we've seen for during the civil rights movement, coming up again.
So
I don't know
Sam,
on the
I get right. I agree with you. Election suppression. I mean, Jim Crow was filled with election suppression in America, and it took the Voting Rights Act to eliminate that. I'm not aware of efforts to do election subversion.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think the election subversion, part of the reason why people I've talked to are so concerned about it is that we've never really seen a concerted effort to make it possible to overturn the results of an election in the U.S. There have been contested elections. I think everyone, is familiar with what happened in 2000, and there's kind of a historical precedent of bitterly fought elections that have been contested in Congress. But there's never been a point where the losers just refuse to concede the results of the race and begin to implement policies that would make it possible so that the winner might not actually be seated. And I think that's part of what is so particularly and uniquely concerning about this specific moment.
Well, there is one example, of course, the most recent one, where the loser refused to concede and has set in place motion to overturn the results. And that is, of course, the defeat of Donald Trump, where he refused to concede. He still claims he's the president, and he is still demanding and getting from his followers continued efforts to recount elections that he lost. Now, and you'll have to tell me what you think about this. The vote, he didn't win, and the votes aren't there, and they can't find them, as the cyber ninjas proved in Arizona. But the continued counting, the continued undermining, sets conditions in place such that the kind of board that they're now writing into law might very well use this kind of confusion in the next election to refuse to certify a result, or to kick people out running local elections, claiming that they're not performing based on just the kinds of allegations that have been proven wrong this cycle. Is that possible?
Well, I think what we're seeing with these post-election reviews, you mentioned the one in Arizona, and there are now ongoing efforts in Texas and Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania to continue to re-examine the election results. And I think what we're creating, what those are doing, is they are creating in the public eye a perception that there are significant problems with elections, which is just not true. The elections in all of those states have been looked at and certified, but it's creating this perception that we may never know. You can never know who really won an election. There may be things that that go so far under the radar that the legitimate winner might not have won. And I think that's a very scary, false idea to start planting in the public sphere. And that is the basis that I think, could be used in future elections to begin to lay the groundwork for, overturning an election. And I think that's why there's been so much attention and so much concern about how quickly these kinds of unusual post-election reviews have spread.
Not enough alarm, in my view. I really don't recall. I mean, democracy has I've never been on the ballot like this. It's been broadly what everybody has fought and died for. I mean, in the 20th century wars were about making space for democracy in the world, and democracies fought the tyranny of the Nazis or the empire in the East, in Japan, in World War II. And World War I, too, was about making the world safe for democracy. The wars in the 21st century have been different. They've been about terrorism and what that means, but it's never very clear what it means, right? Because terrorism's aims weren't as clear. So we haven't had a chance to really stand up for democracy in the same way in a while. But I'd hate to think that all that we fought for in the 20th century, in those world wars, would be that all of those heroes would have died in vain, and we were just going to tear up our democracy on our own 100 years later. That seems appalling to me. But what you've said about election subversion is, I think, novel in American history and enormously dangerous to democracy.
I think that, and I think there's not still a kind of widespread recognition of how deeply this is taking hold, and how deeply it's taken hold. I think, it's easy to look at this where, almost a year after the presidential election, and I think some people might look at this and say, this is just a Trump thing, that, Trump is the one who is inflaming all of, these lies about the 2020 election, and, is really kind of the one kind of fanning the flames. But I think the story of the last year has really shown that that's not true, that this is something that has been embraced much more deeply beyond Trump. We're seeing places that Trump won overwhelmingly. I mean, to see a place like Texas continue to re-examine its election results, or other counties elsewhere that Trump has won that are, asking for so-called election audits. And I think that's just a signal of how deeply this idea that the election could be stolen, that something went wrong, has taken hold. And it's a clear signal that it's really not going away anytime soon, regardless of if Trump is going to be on the ballot or not. And I think that's a very, very scary thing.
Has your research gone so far yet as to figure out who's funding these efforts? Where's the money coming from to keep these rumors afloat, to push these narratives, to do the research, to write these hundreds of bills? Do we know yet where that's coming from?
I don't think we know, and I think there'll be a lot of good reporting. I think kind of trying to figure out who's kind of putting up the money to back these ideas. But one thing we know is these ideas about a stolen election might be new, but there has been for years floating around talk about voter fraud, and this myth of voter fraud, that the elections might have been determined by voter fraud, or the prospect of non-citizen, mass non-citizen voting. That has all been, out there for years, and really kind of became more and more mainstream, kind of leading up to the 2016 and 2020 election. And I think what we're seeing is now the next kind of phase of that lie, a transition from the myth of voter fraud to the myth of a stolen election. But I think there's a lot more investigating to do, and a lot more good reporting that will be done on who's putting up the money behind this. And
I think that Citizens United and the dark money in politics is going to make that a lot harder to figure out who's behind it. But what you said, I think, is really interesting. We've moved from lying about potentially elections, people voting who shouldn't vote, to lying about elections being stolen, to now actually trying to steal elections, or setting in place a mechanism that makes it possible to steal elections. Something unthinkable in a great democracy. Sam, is there anything else to depress me this morning?
Well, I would say just one other thing I would add is the battle we've really seen kick off in the last few weeks has been the battle over redistricting or redrawing electoral districts for state legislatures across the country and congressional districts across the country. And this is something that's done typically once every 10 years, and it's being done this year. And just as they did, in 2011, Republicans have a huge advantage. They're just drawing many more districts than Democrats are. That's because Republicans did enormously well in state legislative races last year. And what we're really starting to see is, this. I think it's hard to think about gerrymandering sometimes in the context of voter suppression, but this is really the foundation that allows all of these policies to go into effect. It allows, it makes it very hard to unseat incumbents. It makes it so that politicians, really only have to cater to the most extreme elements of their parties. And what we're really seeing in places like Texas, which is, in the middle of its redistricting process, is an effort to shore up, Republican control of the state at a moment that increasingly looks politically competitive. There's a clear kind of growing non-white population in Texas. 95% of the population growth there over the last decade was from people of color. But the districts are being drawn in such a way that doesn't translate into political power. The Republicans are distorting that population growth and kind of just rejiggering the line so that it entrenches their control for another decade. So that's something I think that we're going to continue to see play out in the coming months. There'll be a lot of litigation over that across the country. But we're really seeing kind of the foundation of how all of this works play out in real time, and that's something that we only really get to see once every
decade. Yeah. So in addition to election suppression and election subversion, you've now added election irrelevance, because if you draw districts such that you can have a majority vote in a state that's clear majority for, say, the Democrats, and yet you can still have a completely minority Republican-controlled legislature because of the way the boundaries are drawn. So we now add election irrelevance to the list.
Right. It virtually guarantees the outcome of certain elections.
Yes, I think we have seen those in my lifetime. They're in Russia. With regularity. There are elections with absolutely foreseen outcomes in advance, and that no one would ever confuse them with a great democracy. And certainly it's not a model we ought to be following here in America. Sam, I really appreciate your time, and I hope we can continue to talk, and I hope that as you continue to report, you will have cheerier things to talk about as we begin our battles to end this horrific cancer on our democracy.
Thanks so much for having me, Edwin. Happy to come on anytime.
Great. Have a good day.
You too.
Okay. I hope that was enlightening as it was terrifying. As you can tell, I'm putting pieces together here, but I know you can see where it's going. We began at the beginning of the show talking about dark money in politics and the billions that were unleashed by Citizens United. And just now, in this interview with The Guardian's Sam Levine, we talked about the methods the GOP is pushing state by state to have election suppression, election subversion, election irrelevance, things that truly make it possible to steal an election. I know it's unthinkable, but there it is, and you can see it. Now, earlier we've talked about the strategic use of lying and sowing confusion to make more space so that these tools of election subversion and irrelevance can be used. And now I want to move to telling you how actually they have been attempted to be used by Donald Trump and his team, and how they are preparing to use it in the future. And then we'll talk about how we fight back, because this is not really a joke. Two of America's most respected journalists, Bob Woodward and Bob Costa, have recently written a book called Peril. I'm going to talk about that later. This is a book where they tried to figure out what went on in January 6th at the insurrection. And let me just end the hour by reading to you something that Costa said about the reporting that went into this book. He wrote, as we worked on Peril, it became evident that January 6th was not a sporadic moment, as some have tried to cast it. Our reporting shows that it was the culmination of a coordinated pressure campaign. Giuliani and Bannon at the Willard, Eastman and Trump in the Oval, etc. While the riot, well, I would call it an insurrection, while the riot, understandably, was the first central focus. Our book shows that the riot isn't the whole story of January 6th. The story is also what Trump and those around him were doing to use power to keep power in the days prior, with Bannon and Trump seeing January 6th as the reckoning. We'll take our top of the hour break, and I'm going to be back with Matt Ford, a staff writer from the New Republic. He's going to talk about the Eastman memo and his reporting. We're going to put all these pieces together. Stay with us.
NBC News Radio, I'm Chris Coraggio. President Biden plans to host congressional leaders at the White House next week in an effort to win support for two major economic bills. According to the White House, the president will also continue working closely with members of the House and Senate through the weekend. Before leaving for Delaware this morning, Biden told reporters there's no reason both the $1 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill and a larger reconciliation package can't pass. The president said everybody is frustrated, adding that's part of being in government. Women are speaking out in Washington, D.C. today against the most restrictive abortion law in recent U.S. history. Texas's new law banning abortions beyond 6 weeks went into effect last month, and now Mississippi is looking to ban abortions after 15 weeks, which has prompted fears other states with already limited abortion access may follow suit.
I'm from West Virginia. We only have one abortion clinic, and it really puts a lot of women who are low income and single struggling.
This year's annual Women's March is taking place in more than 600 cities after the Supreme Court failed to intervene with the Texas fetal heartbeat bill. It's also the first such march since former President Trump left office. California students are being required to get vaccinated against COVID-19. Governor Gavin Newsom said Friday he will require all staff and students in grades K through 12 to get shots when one of the vaccines is granted full FDA approval for children. Newsom says the mandate will happen in stages, starting with students in grades 7 through 12 and eventually grades K through 6, but the details of that plan are still months away. You can spend one night at Richard Branson's new private island, but it's going to cost you. The billionaire has opened up a new secluded island called Mosquito just across the way from his first private island, Necker, in the British Virgin Islands. Guests can go sailing, kite surfing, wakeboarding, and scuba diving. The Point Estate, which sleeps 16, starts at $17,500 a night, while the rate for the Oasis Estate is $19,000 a night with a 4-night minimum. You're listening to the latest from NBC News Radio.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT Willow Springs is powered by ComEd. Lower your energy bills and reduce your carbon footprint with the ComEd Energy Efficiency Program.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, we're back, and we have some of the final pieces to put in this terrible puzzle today. And to help us do that, I'm joined by Matt Ford, a staff reporter at the New Republic, who's written most recently about the Supreme Court, but before that, about John Eastman, someone who America does not yet know as well as I am sure we are about to, and the damage he has foisted on our republic. Hello, Matt.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled that you're here. Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday.
Can you talk a little bit about your reporting around who John Eastman is, why anybody should care, and what that memo was he wrote?
Sure. Well, John Eastman is a lawyer. He's one of 1.5 million lawyers in the United States. But he's a little different than a lot of them. He has an extremely conservative background. This is a man who's clerked for some of the top conservative judges in the country, including Justice Clarence Thomas. He is a prominent member of the Federalist Society, which included, up until recently, leading one of its subcommittees on federalism and the separation of powers. And he's most currently known for working at the Claremont Institute, which is sort of coalesced into a think tank of MAGA thought. And he is the one who wrote this memo outlining how Trump could try to stay in power after the election.
Wait, go slow, because for those who haven't read the memo, it's unthinkable that someone would write a lawyer would write a memo about how someone can stay in power after an election they've lost. Can you explain that?
Sure. I mean, well, and you're right, it is unthinkable because the Constitution and the last 250 years are fairly clear. Presidents are inaugurated on January 20th, and they leave office on January 20th 4 years later, unless they're lucky enough to win re-election. Donald Trump didn't do that. He lost re-election, and he lost by a considerable margin. But Eastman argued that what could happen is that the sort of invisible mechanisms that Americans had sort of taken for granted over the past 2 centuries that involve the Electoral College could be twisted to his benefit. He argued that Pence, who under the Constitution is vice president, which is also the presiding officer of the Senate, when presiding over the official formal Electoral College count in Congress on January 6th, he argued that Pence could either delay the count and give, Republican-led states more time to sort of cast doubt on the results if Biden won there, or 2, he could throw out Democratic states or Biden-Harris ballots altogether and sort of swing the election to Trump without the people having any say in it.
Okay, so this power that he thought Mike Pence had, that's what led to Trump's speech on January 6th saying, "We love Mike Pence. It's in his hands. He can win. He can save the day for us." And it led all of those rioters, those insurrectionists, to yell, "Hang Mike Pence," when he didn't do that.
Exactly. I think, in terms of understanding for Trump what happened between Election Day and January 6th, it's helpful to think of him as basically just like reaching for options that become increasingly unlikely and also dangerous. At first he starts with, on election night, saying that, they're waiting for the final results. They're going to launch legal challenges. They're going to sort of interrupt this ballot collection process. None of that works. And the courts generally disregard all his claims of conspiracies and fraud and stuff because he doesn't provide any evidence for them. So he tries to get the Supreme Court to intervene, and they don't. He asks Bill Barr and the Justice Department to do something, and they don't. He tries to pressure state legislatures to sort of not send electors who the people selected, but that the state legislators select, which is sort of a gray area in the Constitution that is extremely dangerous. And all this sort of, as we get closer to January 6th, we get an increasing sense of desperation. And it finally leads to someone like Eastman, who is not a mainstream legal voice. He's a very extreme outlier, even among conservatives. And he, catches Trump's attention, goes to the White House, pitches him on this idea, and Trump tries to pressure Mike Pence into following through on it.
And the memo outlines a whole set of theories about. It's nonsense, but it is like a lawyer's writing. It's several pages that all describe actual weaknesses in our laws, loopholes. At any rate, something that if there's enough chaos and enough confusion and enough anger, people will not see clearly enough to understand that this isn't a real opening, but it's a sort of opening, and he could have used that to subvert the election.
That's exactly. The process for electing a president is not as straightforward as people think. And in a lot of ways, it's sort of a very arcane procedure. Now, up until the 2000 election, it was kind of taken for granted that certain things would happen. whoever wins the most votes nationwide generally would win the presidency. We saw in Bush v. Gore that isn't necessarily the case, that presidents can win re-election in the modern era without winning a majority of votes.
Yes.
We've seen that with Trump as well. But there are things like the counting of electoral votes, the idea that state legislatures can select electors despite what the popular vote is. There are some questions about that. These are 200-year-old sort of writings and texts within both the Constitution itself and within the 12th Amendment that was added a few years after ratification to sort of improve the process when the founders almost immediately realized that it wasn't really workable. And that's sort of just kind of gone on autopilot, partly because, there hasn't been much incentive to change it, but also partly because, there was a certain sense of good faith. That people on, Democrats, Republicans, all these people were willing to have a system where free elections would determine the next president. And what we've seen with January 6th and the process up to it is that process can be vulnerable to disruption by people who are not acting in good faith. People like Donald Trump and John Eastman.
How did this man, Eastman, find his way to the center of this insurrection? How did he find his way? How did Donald Trump find John Eastman and make him his legal sword here?
Well, there's an article that just came out today, actually, in the New York Times just a few hours ago that sort of dives further into Eastman. And I won't review it exhaustively, but one of the things that it sort of reports out and reveals is that Trump learned about him from Fox News. He saw him as a guest on, I believe it was Mark Levin's show.
Yes, it was Mark Levin's show. And if anybody has not seen Mark Levin's show, I urge you to watch it, not because you will see 1 second of truth, but because it's eye-opening at the kind of propaganda that our fellow citizens have been barraged with over the last, decade or so.
And so from there, Mark, he calls up Eastman. He seems interested in getting a hold of him. People on the Trump campaign team, Jenna Ellis, who's one of the Trump campaign lawyers, start corresponding with him. He also became prominent last year when he wrote an op-ed for Newsweek arguing that Kamala Harris, who was born in Oakland, California in 1964, might not be eligible for the presidency, which is outlandish and ridiculous and tantamount to birtherism, but relied on sort of the same sketchy legal thinking we see with the Eastman memo, where he sort of makes this hair-splitting bad faith interpretation of birthright citizenship to say, well, maybe there's some questions.
Who did this? Excuse me. Say that again. What lawyer did this?
This was Eastman.
Eastman again. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So just so we're clear, birtherism, for those of you who have the shortest of possible memories, was Donald Trump's effort before he ran for office to claim that Barack Obama couldn't possibly be a citizen of the United States and therefore wasn't a legitimate president because he was born in Hawaii, but maybe he was born somewhere else. And now, we have another person of color who is a now vice president, and Eastman's memo, the other memo that you're talking about, says, you know what, maybe possibly this was before the era of green cards, so we can't be really clear that her parents had the right to be here, so she might not be a citizen, so she might not be eligible, even though she was born here. Do I have that right?
This is the sort of, it's the sort of spurious argument that nobody really makes unless they're sort of seeking a specific outcome. This is the not somebody who looks at the law and says, all right, well, here's what's happening. It's somebody who looks at it, and somebody like Kamala Harris, and says, well, how can I argue that she might not be eligible for the presidency? And, the Newsweek received an intense amount of backlash for that op-ed, and even, Trump and his allies didn't make that argument that I saw. But it sort of testifies to how he gets into these circles and how outlandish it is. I mean, the idea that Kamala Harris isn't eligible for the vice presidency is, I spend a lot of time reading and covering conservative lawyers and conservative legal thought. It's not at all a common viewpoint among them. This is the most extreme of the extreme outlier, and it found its way to the White House.
All right. I think possibly the other way around. The White House was looking for extremes and found and reached out. Yeah, because strategically, the extremes, you're a journalist, you can call them extreme thought. I'm just going to call them lies, if you'll forgive me for that. But the fog that it creates, creates the opportunity that then the Eastman memo allows somebody to say, hey, I have a mechanism to cut through all this fog, and here's what it is.
And it's worth noting that with the Eastman memo, it's not just a freestanding legal analysis of the 12th Amendment and the Electoral Count Act. It's built on the idea that there was actually fraud when there was none, that there was actually something systemically wrong with the vote when there is no verifiable, reliable, credible evidence to say that.
I want to just, Matt, interrupt you for a second. Many people say what you just said. There was no evidence that there was fraud in the last election. And I want to beg everyone to turn that around and say there was ample evidence, overwhelming evidence, that this election was the fairest, most transparent, most honest election we've ever had.
Exactly. And so it really speaks to the depth of what's going on here. You know, if Eastman was making this argument when there was if there was some sort of genuine uncertainty, if we had a hanging Chad situation like in Florida, or some warehouse full of ballots had gone up in flames, then in a strange hypothetical, we could be talking about, well, what is the 12th Amendment envision? What is the Electoral Count Act envision? That's not what happened here, and so I think that's what distinguishes this from sort of a pie-in-the-sky legal commentary to something more nefarious.
Right, based in lies. Yep. Okay, so we have a nefarious justification for overturning the election that was embraced by Donald Trump leading up to January 6th as he tried to hold power. Right, and the Democrats, I believe, tried to impeach him for that, and they got a few, but not enough Republican votes to make that possible.
Right, I believe they got 7 Republican votes, which is I think it's 67 to impeach. It's worth noting that those 7 Republicans, except for Mitt Romney, who had done it for conviction last time, that's still a historic rebuke of the president. Before Mitt Romney had voted in the first impeachment to impeach or to convict Donald Trump, in all the previous presidential impeachments, no senator of a president's party had actually voted to remove him from office. So the fact that a substantial number of them, 7, of the 40 or so senators that are Republicans, that voted to do that's a historic testament to the scale of what Trump did. And it's also a historic reminder of how much grip and control he has over that party, the fact that only 7 of them did so.
Yeah. Okay, before I let you go, you've reported a lot on the Supreme Court. Do you want to tell us anything?
Well, it starts up next week. I apologize. It starts up next week. And it's going to be a blockbuster. We already know the big one that's coming up. There's a case called Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization out of Mississippi. That is going to be looking at Roe v. Wade, and that where the state of Mississippi has explicitly asked the court to overturn Roe v. Wade. I don't know, I don't think anybody wants to exactly say one way or the other which way the court will rule, but I will say that there is no one out there who is predicting that Roe v. Wade will survive in the way that we know it, as it has existed in the last 40 years. So that's obviously going to be the big one. They're taking a look at gun cases out of New York. There are cases on affirmative action and LGBT rights percolating up through the lower courts as well. This could be a big one, and it's going to be a sign of how far the court's sort of entrenched conservative majority is going to be willing to go now that they have 6 votes to do whatever they wish.
And this court has done something that is also a break with judicial precedent. They have been telling people, hey, these are the laws we think these are the decisions we think were wrongly made. We're looking for cases. Please bring them that will let us make these changes, correct the errors of courts in the past. That's unheard of, and it flies in the face not only of stare decisis, but all kinds of other judicial behaviors that were meant to make a system of laws more democratic. They're really saying we want to reshape the American legal world in a new way, and we think if you bring us the following cases, we can do it. And this all comes percolating up through the Federalist Society.
Well, and we do see occasions where justices will look at a law or a precedent and say, I don't really think this is working. Maybe we'll be able to refine it in future cases, and that sort of stimulates lawyers in the lower courts to sort of make arguments corresponding to that. But you're right. We are seeing a lot of conservative legal groups tailor their arguments to and tailor their cases, even bringing test cases and test plaintiffs with the expected outcome in certain ways of what they want on religious freedom, on abortion, on a whole host of issues.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's worth noting that it's still 6 justices, and things can go awry. We saw last term that there was a case on Philadelphia adoption agencies and whether they could deny access to same-sex couples. The justices did not actually go as far as some of the conservative litigants wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So while there is certainly a strong rightward shift on the court, it's going to be interesting to watch this term just how far they go and how they mediate it.
So it's very important for us to keep a distinction between policy differences that people have in a big democracy and existential differences like we're going to try and overturn the democracy. There's many decisions the Supreme Court may make that I will be appalled by and I won't like. And I can live with that. But if they find a way to the Eastman part of the law, they find a way to say that somehow the operation of law in a constitution that begins with the words "we the people," that we can somehow tailor election laws so that the Constitution doesn't mean that, but means we minority rule in some bizarre way, then I think they will have lost any legitimacy, and they're in some danger of that.
It's certainly true that a lot of people on the left are growing really disenchanted with the court, and I think partly because I think the court realizes this. We've seen from Alito to Thomas to Barrett to even Breyer.
Yep.
Saying they're worried about public perception of the court.
As they should be.
I think there is some comfort to be taken in the fact that the court didn't really engage with or embrace any of these ideas in the 2020 election, partly because they were so novel. But at the same time, they also took steps to ensure that, county clerks could not send out more absentee ballots, or that various other election law changes couldn't be made to help people get access to the ballot during the pandemic. So it's going to be important to watch, and especially in 2022 and 2024. Even if they don't go fully embracing the Eastman memo, whether the conservatives on the court will be willing to, take steps that could make it harder for Americans to cast a ballot and have their voice in this democracy.
Yeah, Citizens United, which is now 12 years old or something, certainly does not give me any confidence that they're improving since then. And their appalling decision to let stand the bounty hunter provisions of the Texas anti-abortion law pending review, but to not stay it is a remarkable tip your hat towards the post-Reconstruction states' rights. States can do whatever they want, and doesn't matter who they run over to do it. Very frightening.
And I think even some of the justices themselves realize the danger of that path. We saw, especially with the SB 8 ruling, one of the most strong dissents wasn't from necessarily Kagan or Breyer. It was from Chief Justice Roberts, who was not known as a friend of liberals, a friend of Democrats. He was the one saying, look, this is a law that is seeking to do a lot of very strange things to get around the federal courts. And we should, pause and make sure that it's viable and constitutional before allowing it to go in effect.
Right, but he didn't prevail.
No, he didn't.
No. Well, Matt, I deeply appreciate your time on this fall Saturday, and I want to stay in touch and talk to you again as the court season opens, as events unfold. I think you're a terrific writer, and I think you've got your eye on really important things.
Well, thanks so much. It was a pleasure to be on today, and I look forward to chatting again soon.
All righty. That was Matt Ford, staff writer at the New Republic. Can I keep going, or do I need to take a break?
If you want, keep going.
I guess I'm going to take my last break now because I really want to motor afterwards and talk to you guys now to put all these pieces together that you've heard today about the threat we're facing.
This is Gary Menzel from Roofers and Waterproofers Local 11. Are you happy with your job, or are you looking for a new and exciting career? Wouldn't you like to get up early every morning and head into work so that you could be home early to take your kids to baseball, basketball, or gymnastics practice? Consider a career with us. We're professionally skilled roofers and waterproofers, OSHA trained for on-the-job safety, and our union is growing. Construction remains strong in Illinois and Wisconsin, where we just recently opened a brand new apprenticeship training center near Madison. Union roofers and waterproofers work outside in the fresh air every day, and we get paid well for the hard work we do. We have family health care and a pension plan that you'll be glad you have when you're planning your retirement someday. We want you to earn a living wage and learn to work safely. So if you're ready to join Roofers and Waterproofers Local 11, give us a call, 708-345-0970, and learn more about us at rooferslocal11.org.
Wizard World returns to Chicago October 15th through the 17th at Stevens Convention Center in Rosemont. Celebrate pop culture and meet William Shatner, Michael Rooker, Outlander Sam Heughan, and stars from Harry Potter, Buffy, Arrow, Once Upon a Time, and more. Plus, artists, Q&As, music, you name it. You can even dress up in your favorite costume. It's okay. It's Wizard World. Tickets start at $40. Kids 10 and under are free. Visit wizardworld.com for more info.
Hello, fellow progressives. Attorney Tony Moret here. You've been hearing from me for a few months now, and I've been hearing from you. As an estate planning attorney, I get a lot of questions. Estate planning can be confusing and sometimes a little scary. It's my job to guide you through the maze of paperwork, offer you options that best fit your family, and give you some peace of mind. The calls I've been getting from fellow WCPT listeners have been intelligent and thoughtful, exactly the kind of clients I cherish. Thank you for letting me draft your living trusts, wills, and protecting legacy for future generations. In my practice, facts matter, so advertising on WCPT is such a natural fit. Let me help you put together the right estate plan for your family, mindfully. Call me, Attorney Tony Moret, to schedule a free virtual consultation to keep all of us safe. 847-996-0496. That's 847-996-0496. Check out my website at moretlawoffice.com. Moret spelled M-O-R-E-E, and let's put your plan in motion.
Hi everyone, Tooth 19 here. Did you ever wonder why in a world as advanced as ours, where common man can travel to space and back, why we can't provide an easier way to do dentistry? I wonder all the time. I would love to have a dental appointment that's fast, no noise, no anxiety, no gagging, and no bad tasting stuff. Well, the staff at Total Dentistry told me that's possible with sedation dentistry. It's a calm, relaxed way to get treatment. So those worries, like gagging or anxiety, become minimized by the sedation. And for those with busy lifestyles where 4 to 5 appointments isn't practical, one-day dentistry with sedation is the perfect solution. I wonder if Dr. Pelican Total Dentistry will be our first floating dental office in space. Total Dentistry, a general dental practice like no other. Call 847-358-2477 for your free sedation consultation today. 847-358-2477.
This is WCPT 820, where facts matter.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay. We've had a lot of stuff today, including, unexpectedly, live coverage of rallies downtown and around the country where women are standing up for their rights in anticipation of what's coming down in the Supreme Court. So let's just talk about some of the pieces. Dark money, that's Citizens United. opening up this massive influx of money, most of which we can't trace, to fund massive dissemination of propaganda campaigns and outright lies, as well as efforts to infiltrate our court system and the agencies of government. 10 years later, we have quasi-legal theories about how elections work, this Eastman memo that was embraced by the Trumpists that provide them windows of opportunity to subvert elections. And we have going on at the same time, since that didn't work, not at least in the last election, they still have all that theory, they still have all that propaganda, they still have all those lies. They have even more doubt, and now they're putting in place state by state rules that will allow them to change the results of elections. This is an unfolding attempt to destroy our democracy. And I want to play you a clip of Bob Costa, again, talking about the book Peril and what they found. Listen to this.
We see President Trump, through our reporting, be a very active player in the days before January 6th. On January 2nd, senators like Mike Lee and Lindsey Graham, two top Republicans, close allies, are being pressured by the White House. Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, Rudy Giuliani, and John Eastman, this conservative lawyer, to think through how to help President Trump get his aim of throwing some of these electors out, moving the election to the House of Representatives, where Republicans, because they have control of the most delegations, could potentially tip the election to President Trump. And a very important meeting comes on January 4th, where Vice President Pence and his lawyer and his advisors come in to the Oval Office. President Trump is there with John Eastman, this conservative lawyer. And for the first time, we've published this memo that has gotten a lot of attention this week, a 6-part memo from John Eastman outlining how Pence could throw out electors and give the election to Trump. And you see in this scene, President Trump saying to Pence, listen to John Eastman, listen to John, listen to John.
Okay. I don't think it can be clearer than that. You have the President of the United States directing the Vice President to steal the election. It's as clear as day. And I hope someday we will prosecute him for that. But here's what we need to do while we wait for that. Look, Bob Woodward, Bob Costa, terrific reporters, but also conservative thinkers like Robert Kagan are all writing about the GOP's effort to overturn our democracy. That is unimaginable. And that's part of the problem. That's really part of the problem, because democracies have a very difficult time preparing for unthinkable things. Let me just give you some background. Throughout the 1930s, there was one lonely MP in England who warned his colleagues that the Nazi Party in Germany was gathering power. He warned that they were arming. He had evidence. He had actual documents that were taken by the intelligence agencies about the rearmament, the illegal rearmament that was going on. He warned that the Nazi government was planning to reclaim land lost in World War I. He warned about the peril that was in Europe, and his colleagues paid no attention. They treated him as a quack. British leadership understood, as democracies usually do, that this wasn't an extraordinary threat, but rather the normal kind of thing, something that good diplomacy could handle, something that led their diplomats to famously say there would be peace in our time. Of course, we now know that that lone MP, Winston Churchill, was correct. And had Europe been able to imagine the horror that was coming, they might have actually prepared and prevented it. And we weren't any better here in the U.S. We were looking at the same history. It was just across an ocean, the same current events. It was just across an ocean, 2 oceans, in fact. But we weren't able to prepare. We, in fact, were so unprepared that Pearl Harbor happened, that we had a massive military attack that destroyed the Pacific Fleet, and we were left unprepared and had to completely rearm. And FDR and the congressional leadership, Democrats at the time, I might add, did that. They helped us get ready, and then enter that fight for democracy. Now, in our own time, same thing. When you can't really imagine the unthinkable, you can't prepare for it. There's too much doubt. Oh, they aren't that bad, they said about the totalitarians in Europe. But we've heard the same thing here when we think of the threat of climate change. We've known about it for a long time, and only after really Al Gore and others raised their hand and said, this is going to be important, we need to do something about it, did the oil industry and others, the coal industry, start to fund massive campaigns to say, oh, the science isn't clear, oh, climate change is a natural phenomenon. They just cast enough doubt. And again, democracies can't easily make progress against unthinkable things. I don't want us to make that same mistake now with our democracy. Let us not lose everything because of a failure of imagination. I know saying a president in the White House was plotting to destroy our electoral democracy is unthinkable. I know saying that legislation that is being written in state after state, being passed in many states, creates the levers for overthrowing the will of the people when it comes to electing a president. It's unthinkable, and yet the facts are undeniable. We cannot fail to imagine what this is like. And look, we don't have to imagine it from scratch. We have history, both old and recent, to guide us. The old history is something I'm going to talk more about next week, and it is America at the end of Reconstruction. But it's relevant, however, because, look, there's a connection between right-wing anti-democratic efforts and racial animus. This is Kevin Phillips, and we've talked about this before. He helped create the modern GOP when he said the party that can sweep into its tent the most ethnic and racial animosities can grow. And since then, this kind of animus has been the most dynamic force and most consistent force within the GOP. But we don't have, and I should just say one more thing, but back in Reconstruction, that did lead to an election, one state election in Louisiana that was contested. We know who won it, but there was enough doubt that there was actually another insurrection, and it led to a massacre, one of the most shameful massacres in American history, a massacre of mostly black Americans in Colfax, Louisiana, and you should look it up. Really terrible. Anyway, we don't have to go that far back this week. In what you heard Woodward and Costa talking about was that we have a crisis. It's manufactured by Trump and the GOP. And let's think about this. That crisis created a foreign policy crisis, and we don't think about that. But this is the Milley news this week. Remember, China, Russia, and Iran are not our friends, and they're looking at us. And at the time, as Donald Trump is refusing to concede, they're wondering seriously whether our democracy is collapsing, and more ominously, whether Donald Trump would order some kind of an attack so that he could declare some emergency to stay in power. That led to worries that our adversaries, fearing such an attack, might preemptively strike us. And that's what led General Milley to reach out. He reached out to reassure the Chinese that we had no intention to attack. His actions were heroic, notwithstanding what Matt Gaetz, the alleged pedophile, had to say about him. They were heroic. And heroes, they turn out to come in unexpected places. Mike Pence, while he was considering Trump's request that he act on the Eastman memo, and he didn't say no, he hemmed and hawed and said maybe, and he went to think about it, and he asked people about it. And you know what? When history called, Dan Quayle, his fellow Hoosier, didn't hesitate. He told Pence it was a dumb idea and he should forget it. And look, I think back, I'm old enough to remember, and some of you are too, that debate when Dan Quayle was running for vice president, and he was in a debate with Lloyd Bentsen, the senator who was running for vice president on the Democratic side, and Lloyd Bentsen belittled him for not being Jack Kennedy. And, you know, today, I mean, back then, I thought that was quite a hit, and I thought it was a one-sided debate. But right now, I think Dan Quayle doesn't need to be Jack Kennedy. Today, he's a hero in his own right. And, you know, now that we know that Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and others were fully engaged in an attempt to hold on to power after losing the election, we can say, well, they lost. But we know it was a dress rehearsal. We know now that there's this multi-state effort. We've talked about that before. And we know that they're sowing doubts. They're continuing to sow doubts so that they can have an opening for this. And so I imagine, and we all should, that the GOP, whose base of voters has, after all, suffered from an unprecedented campaign of lies and propaganda, that they may choose Donald Trump to run as their standard bearer once again. Oh my gosh. Let's say the election results are close, as close as they were last time. But now Trump loyalists control the electors and the electoral system in several important states. Their partisans declare errors in key counties and disqualify enough voters to change the outcome. They follow the Eastman memo. Trump declares victory. His supporters rally. You can see that, right? That doesn't take too much imagination. And again, we have to be able to imagine it. We can't be afraid to see this. Of course, the great majority of Americans won't have it. We won't have it. But the months before the inauguration, some of our adversaries, Russia, for example, they see an opportunity to damage us further. And you know what? They recognize Trump as the legitimate winner. And here, emboldened by that, some governors call out their National Guard to maintain order. Protests get large. Again, I'm not asking you to push beyond what the facts that we have and what history has shown us is likely. You have to see it in your mind. Imagine these protests. In one, imagine a poorly prepared, as they would be for this, National Guard members getting a shooting match with the protesters. In one place, hundreds could be killed. If it's like 1873 in Colfax, Louisiana, most of them are people of color, and you should look that up. So what happens next? In the chaos, the pressure to make some kind of deal to preserve our union starts to boil. Well, in the 1870s, they had that pressure after we just fought the Civil War, and yet we were coming apart again. We had this deal, and it was, again, related to Louisiana elections. The deal ended Reconstruction. The Supreme Court opined in one of its most awful cases, Cruikshank, that the Bill of Rights didn't apply to states, and that allowed the brutal repressions of Jim Crow. I hope you can get that in your head. I hope you can imagine that, because folks like Kagan on the right, the writings of Bob Woodward, Bob Costa, and others, they paint a picture where this isn't just theoretical. It's likely if we let it happen. Likely. We have to imagine it. We have to see it to fight it. So what would this pressure to unite, what would it look like in 2025? You know, it's hard to say. Here I can't imagine that. I just don't know. Again, in 1870, we know what it was, but maybe it's a rollback of government authority to the Lochner era where corporations were free to do as they please to the environment and to their employees. A lot of that dark money, that's what that wants. Perhaps a return to more state right era so that civil rights and women's rights and gay rights can be curtailed across a chunk of the continent. Perhaps those of us in the majority just get fed up and we just decide to do what Czechoslovakia did and peacefully go our separate ways. Serious people, serious scholars are considering these things and talking about them now, and you should too. We need to see 2020 for what it was, a dress rehearsal. And next time, do not expect press conferences in garden store parking lots. And don't expect GOP elected officials, I don't know, to stand up for actual voters, because all of those guys are being replaced by toadies who are loyal to Donald Trump and not to our democracy. But here's the thing. The right has underestimated our resolve. They call us snowflakes. They think we'll melt away. They're wrong. If you can imagine what they're planning, we can fight it. We will stay vigilant. We will stay vigilant. I'm convinced we will, all of us, everyone who's listening and everyone who you talk to, and millions and millions and millions of Americans will persevere. Each of us has a role to play in saving our democracy. And you heard from End Citizens United, but you've heard from others on this show and others. There are ways to get involved. I don't know how many people today, hundreds of thousands around the country are marching. There are ways to get involved. The only thing you can't do is sit back and feel like there's nothing you can do about it. Look, we are already winning. We stopped the coup from happening the first time. We have now outed their plots, and we're talking about them. Now we have to push Congress to pass bills that protect our democracy. And it means doing the civic work to build back trust. I know some of you are calling, and I'll get to you in a second, but I just want to... Look, the time is coming. The good people of America have had enough of the lies and the hateful rhetoric. We've had enough of the division. We've had enough of the plain stupidity of it. And I talk to people all the time, and some of them are in Indiana and conservative states, in Texas, and they are not going to put up with this. And to quote again, rarely done on progressive radio, but to quote from the good book from Isaiah, we are going to work until the eyes of the blind open, the ears of the deaf are unstopped, because then we can get on with the hard work as one country, as one people, rich in our diversity, and we won't be stopped. And let me close with this. The world is changing all around us. I don't believe the next century will be America's century, as the last one was. But if we prevail in this fight, if we turn back this effort to overturn our democracy here, this race-based effort to overturn our democracy here, and win and preserve our democracy, and pass the legislation that will begin to right some of the social ills here in the United States. If we do that, and then we show the world what it really means to be a free people, what it really means to treat each other with respect and afford them the dignity they deserve. This is the real work of a healthy democracy, where we see in our fellow citizens ourselves. And if we set this example for the world, well, I think we will see progress all over the planet. And you know how we do it? We tell our fellow citizens, we free them from their blindness, and we tell our homegrown bigots and our autocrats that no one any longer cares a fig for their crazy ravings. So let's get to work. Anyway, that's my rant for the day. And now, David, you're on the air.
Yeah.
David from San Francisco.
David.
Hi, Edwin.
Yes.
Hi, Edwin. Yeah, I agree, and it's kind of interesting. I've been I was raised in a town in St. Louis that was in the suburbs of St. Louis. It was the highest concentration of John Birchers in America, and we knew 50 years ago that these saboteurs, what they were up to, that it was all just divide and conquer schemes. And it's interesting, back in the 70s and 80s, I've been calling radio stations. I've been in radio since I was, since 1969. And I used to call up radio talk shows, and whenever they'd spout this kind of crap, I'd say, well, that sounds like white trash to me. And it's funny, nowadays when and it seemed to make a difference. They would always get stifled because, you know, if it was a rich, snooty guy that was given bad advice, they were white trash. It wasn't, you know, a beat-up guy that had 6 pickup trucks in his backyard. It was rich people that were white trash. And nowadays I notice that Facebook has banned me twice for using the expression white trash. And so it's a little more difficult to put a stop to it when you know, when it becomes broad-based like that. But I was interested in your interview with the legal scholar and the Supreme Court, and I just knowing about the 1776 economics, what drove the 13 colonies to create America, it was because the king was sucking all the money back to London, and he would take it back in gold and he would pay us in paper. And that was used to be a major sticking point with people like the John Birchers and the right-wingers. But nowadays, they don't really seem to understand that when the Supreme Court did a ruling just about 3 or 4 years ago saying that interstate gambling could now happen with abandon, and that interstate banking could go to the Cayman Islands, that was plain as day sucking America's money straight overseas in a massive way. Something like a Super Bowl, you could lose hundreds of millions of dollars in a matter of minutes. You know, that America could be fleeced. If you remember the Kentucky Derby just a couple of months ago, it was a rigged game, and you can bet those online gambling operations didn't pay people back when that game was turned around. But that so-called moral majority Supreme Court authorized something that would actually fleece America into not only a bad investment, but that it could happen by the moment. And when you see, actually, I've seen numbers during the COVID epidemic. People have really gotten caught up in gambling, and America's infrastructure is being starved, and America's cash reserves are going to unknown places with the gambling. But I like to use the expressions about these politicians are elected to manage America's property. And for the Republicans to not want to invest in America's property, fixing the schools, fixing the roads, fixing the bridges, fixing the locks and dams, fixing all of this stuff, if it's working badly, neglect is expensive. And just the idea that these so-called fiscal conservatives are not fiscal conservatives at all because they're not investing in American property.
So, David, I thank you for your call. I appreciate that. I can't speak to your Facebook ban, but I don't think I think we can be respectful of our fellow Americans, even if they have been fooled by the lies and the sort of tribal taunts that have been out there. And as for what our elected officials are elected to do, I think you said they're elected to take care of our property. You and I disagree a little bit on that. I think they're elected to strengthen our democracy, to support the Constitution. That's what they swear their oath to. I do think it helps to have a strong economy, and I believe strongly in investing and passing these infrastructure laws. But the purpose is to build, after all, a more perfect union, and there's a lot of parts to that we have to think about. I'm also confident that this Congress is going to deliver for us. Okay, I have another Dave calling. Dave, you're on.
Yeah. Hey, Edwin. On that book, Carol, I kind of wonder, would January 6th, if that would have even happened, how long did Woodward and Costa, how long were they sitting on that information? And I was listening on Miller's show or whatever, and Malcolm Nance even. He had said more or less the same thing. He said, sitting on that stuff, that he should have been going either to the information, with that information to the either authorities or reporters or something, you know. And
okay, so that's a fair question. That's a fair question, Dave. Let's take that one at a time. In this case, this was reporting on January 6th. It was post-election about what happened, and I think what they did was timely. Nothing they could have said would have made a difference in the time slot available. There's more, if there is any criticism, and I actually don't think there is, but if Woodward is open to any criticism, it wouldn't be this book. It would be the one earlier on where he talked to Trump, and Trump acknowledged how dangerous COVID was, and said so in his own words. And that was something that Woodward didn't make public right away. There, I think there is some reason to be concerned. But in this book, I think they've done us a great service by figuring out what happened and letting us know. And there was no way they knew it in time to have helped us. But it is in time to help us because this is still going on. And we have got to put a stop to it before the next election.
To like Malcolm Nance, like he said, that Booker age, and now this one, he said that's 2 strikes that he's had with Trump, and he failed. You know, he should have reported. And I feel the same way. I feel the man, he just put a few gold coins over country on that one myself.
Well, okay, we can. I appreciate your call as always. We don't have to agree completely, and I don't agree with you on that. But I'm happy that you feel that you can call and say it.
Okay. Well, let's agree to disagree.
You bet. But thank you for listening, and thank you for your call. Okay, I have time, I think, for one more. No. All right. So let me wrap up. And here's what I want to take away from today. While we were on the phone, tens of thousands, I don't know really, I don't have the numbers. I'm here in a studio, but people are marching all over the country for women and for women's rights. We heard from remarkable women in Congress about abortion, both pro and con, but we heard about it in the voices of women in the halls of Congress this past week. It was unprecedented and enormously important. And as one of my guests, Barbara Flynn Curry, said, look, if you hear from women in their own voices everywhere, it's going to change how we think about issues like reproductive rights, about if we learn their experiences this way. I think she's absolutely right. We heard today about the great perils of dark money and the enormous damage it's done, not just in individual elections, but to the entire system, how it's corrosive of our democracy in every branch of government. And you heard things you could do about it. Again, go to End Citizens United, sign up, make a small contribution, get involved. You heard from fabulous reporters, one detailing the ways that voter suppression is being legalized in many states, detailing the way election nullification is being legalized in some states, detailing the way election irrelevance through redistricting means doesn't matter who you vote for, the same guys are going to be in charge, is happening in states. This is supposed to be, and I think it may still be, the greatest democracy in the history of the world. We now have, in our time, in our hands, the opportunity to save it. It's no less important than the battles that were fought in Iwo Jima, in Normandy, battles that were bloodier, but were fought in the name of making democracy making space for democracy in this world. Abe Lincoln talked about it at Gettysburg. Will it stand? Will government of the people, by the people, for the people perish from this earth? Donald Trump wanted it to. He sat in the Oval Office and plotted to end it. It is outrageous, it's treasonous, and we are not done with it. Stand up, America. Stand up. If you do, we win and a better day's coming. I will see you next week, and we will talk about something fun like Reconstruction in America. Have a great week.